Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our Committee of the Whole on October the 21st. Thank you for meeting with us on this earlier time. We scheduled the meeting originally in the evening, but given that it's the general election, it made sense to move it to the day so we can later see how the election impacts our municipality. So I do wish to acknowledge that we are meeting on the territory of the Souq Nation. And we are in a committee of the whole session, so for councillors, remember that there's no seconder required. You would just move the motion, we would discuss it and take a vote. And I did get clarity under public input that it's a 5-minute maximum for public input unless council passes a resolution to extend that time. Okay, so the way we just have a couple of business items today, and after we receive each item report, then we'll call for public input, and I'd like to do that prior to council moving any resolutions so we can have that input session. Okay, so I'll turn your attention then, council. I'll look for a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Moved by Councillor Bateman. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously, and that brings us to 3.1, the Sooke Housing Needs Report. And I'll turn it over to planning to introduce the report, and our consultant, please.
Thank you, Your Worship and Committee of the Whole. Today we're here to discuss the findings and recommendations of the Housing Needs Report. Urbanics Consultants Limited is here to take us through the report. The purpose of today is to have a fulsome discussion and to provide feedback to planning staff and Urbanics to incorporate into the final report. Following today's meeting, the next steps will be to send the draft report to the CRD and to the Municipal Planners Housing Needs Subcommittee for comment and to discuss the findings at the Affordable Housing Committee meeting on November 28th. Souq is the first in the region to complete a report under the new legislation. As such, staff would like to glean feedback from numerous perspectives and spend time deep diving into some Souq-specific issues before finalizing the report. The final report will come before Council at the December 9th regular meeting. And now I'll turn things over to Ross Blackwell and Sophie Payne from Urbanics.
Thank you so much. Just need you to turn on the microphone, please.
Sure. Is this on?
That's correct.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. I have kind of a soft voice, so I definitely need this. So thank you so much for having us today. It was such a pleasure conducting this report. Souq is such a beautiful community. And I'll get right into the challenges we saw right away in Souq. We saw that there was a limited availability of housing that is affordable to the residents of the community. We saw concerns related to housing accessibility and aging in place for an aging population. We saw a limited supply of low-income and non-market housing, and we saw a limited housing diversity across the housing continuum. So we developed a comprehensive review and identified strategies for addressing these challenges. Some of the limitations and assumptions we took early on were that there would be no unforeseen economic or political events that would affect the study at any national, provincial, or local level. We also assumed actual growth rates would be relatively consistent with historical growth rates, and that the demand and market analysis would be based on estimates, assumptions, and other information based on research from the market and knowledge of the industry. And then moving into the housing needs assessment portion of the report, we developed a demographic and economic profile of Souq, and it paints a picture of the community and what the community can expect now and in the future as far as its needs. So demographically, we found that Souq at the 2016 census is about sitting at 13,000. Compared to the region, province, and the national growth rate, it's rather high. It's at 3.2%, whereas the CRD is only about 1.2%. The working age population, which means 15 to 64 years old, is slightly decreasing. It's slightly decreased from 2011. And also, the age group under 15 years old is decreasing. We see that the age group that is increasing consistently has been 65 and older. There is a declining household size, although the majority of homes appear to have children. And there's a higher percentage of family households than non-family households compared to the CRD in BC. And this has ramifications for housing, which I'll get into in just a moment. And projections by 2031, we see about 25% of Souq's population being 65 or older. Right now, it sits at 17%. And economically, it's probably not surprising that public services, manufacturing, and trade services are the 3 top industries of employment. And assuming the trade services and tourism sectors continue to increase, because they've been increasing since about 2006, the Sooke could expect to have more low to middle income workers, which would have ramifications on the type of housing that would need to be provided. Right now, 71% of employed residents commute out of the community, which is really high compared to the CRD, which sits at 37 and 49% for BC. So that means that many households rely on personal vehicular transportation, which is going to make increasing density in Sooke possibly a challenge, as well as a number of people interviewed indicated that many people do want to work in Sooke. It's just not really feasible at this point. So there is interest in people working here. The housing stock profile, there is a significant dominance of single-family dwelling, a high rate of home ownership, which may show a preference among residents for home ownership, and then also a strong pattern of increasing rates of home ownership with age. And the increase in the senior population is likely going to create demand for more accessible, barrier-free type of units. The gap analysis that we determined as a result of the needs assessment, there's 4 major main gaps that we identified. And the first one that I'll go into is the lack of service lands and lack of available zone lands for diverse housing stock. So talking to home builders and developers, there's a high cost of land. There's not enough demand, which is leading to low absorption rates. And they also reported improved infrastructures needed for more growth. There's a low percentage and low vacancy of residential zones in Sooke, particularly for small lot and multifamily housing. So as a result, one option would be to create more lands by extending public infrastructure outside the main population structure. Main population center can create long-term municipal burdens, financial municipal burdens. So infill opportunities are really recommended at this point, which could include rezoning existing residential lands and creating more of the in-demand affordable housing types. So also the high land costs in Sooke necessitates using land more, being able to use small lots, because this is going to significantly reduce the price of the home for the end user. And then also, according to a conversation that we had with some real estate professionals, the type of housing product that seems to be most in demand, according to their experience, is a small lot, 1,200 to 1,400 fee simple, ground-oriented townhouse or half duplex, which has been hard to find for them to sell. And then the second gap we found was local affordability. There are very high shelter costs in Sooke, even relative to the CRD and BC. No median household can afford a single-family dwelling that's on the market. And about half of the residents fail the affordability criteria, meaning they're paying over 30% of their income for a 2-bedroom rental unit. And this is the most common type of rental unit in Sooke. So this suggests that the rising rents are going to put pressure on the market and non-housing market to provide the residential products that are affordable at or below market value for nearly half of the households. So it is important to note that this is a comprehensive review of the housing study. So there are about 31% of households in Sooke make over 100,000, so their taste may be more in line with the market housing. So there is still a demand for it that's significant in Sooke. And also the largest interesting point that we found is that the largest share of so since 2011, we've seen an increase in movable dwellings. They've shown the most increase out of the proportion of the housing stock, which makes sense because it is more affordable than renting and even for bachelor suites. And it remains the only affordable option for median one-person households. Also, couple-only, lone parent, one person, and the medium household income can only afford buying a manufactured home rather than the other options would be single family or condo or any of those. Also, social and non-market housing towards below market rentals may in part be alleviated by a market that responds to the affordable, smaller type of units that are in demand. So based on the survey that we gave to people across the Sooke community, we received comments back on that survey that asked for smaller units, because smaller units in Sooke is going to equal more affordable housing typically. And also talking to stakeholders and business owners, we find that not only keeping the current workforce, but procuring a workforce is increasingly difficult due to the housing costs of the community. Co-housing has presented a really interesting, some really interesting information came out of Harborside, and Sooke is apparently the epicenter of co-housing in Canada, particularly for seniors. They have a 350-person wait list for the next co-housing unit, which is very larger than any wait list of assisted living or anything else that we came across in the study. And they stopped keeping records at 350, so there may even be more. And this is really interesting, not only because it's co-housing has the potential to remove the developer from the development piece, which in turn reduces the market cost to the people in the co-housing development, but also the co-housing experience can allow people to age in place for longer, which would have returns in healthcare savings, so there'd be less pressure on the healthcare system. And also, there is research that shows that living in a co-housing situation actually produces less waste, less carbon emissions, and is generally considered more green. And the last gap would be the declining households and the rapidly aging population. So Sooke is experiencing a shift towards smaller size households, which would in turn be smaller houses. And so it's significant too that the only increase in that the share of the population is only increasing in the 65 and older range. Also, this is pointing to an untapped demand for smaller market price ownership and rental units. With the aging population, thinking about the life cycle, enabling the accessibility features becomes very important. And also ground-oriented townhomes, duplexes would really meet this need. So looking into the numbers of projected need, assuming tenure preferences remain stable in Sooke, we have 671 new owner households every 5 years between 2016 and 2031. And we have 164 renter households every 5 years between 2016 and 2031. And the majority of the new households, the head householder will be between the ages of 45 to 54 and 65 plus. Also, the housing action plan which we're developing is organized to be very hands-on, action-oriented to address all these challenges. So there's 5 main objectives, and then under each objective there's a strategy that lists specific action items, suggested action items. And the 5 main objectives that we identified were addressing the market rate housing needs, addressing non-market housing needs, enhancing the supply of rental housing, enhancing housing affordability, and lastly, preparing for the anticipated growth in the population 65 and over. So I'd like to open up the floor to any questions that you may have after the presentation or perhaps after reviewing the report.
Okay, thank you. Is that your presentation then? Okay, so questions or comments from members of council? Councillor St. Pierre?
I was curious in your report about movable dwellings and the high demand for movable dwellings. I'd like to know how that was defined.
How did we find it?
Movable dwellings. What are defined as movable dwellings?
Oh, okay. So they're able to, you're able to put a foundation on it, but it's basically the manufactured home where it's prefabricated. And typically you put a foundation on it, but the idea is that it's actually able to be removed from the lot where it is.
And so what would be the recommended infrastructure from a district's point of view in order to have more movable dwellings? What would that look like exactly?
So that would be, there's a low vacancy in the type of residential zoning for movable/manufactured dwellings, so it would be increasing those lands because they're reaching capacity.
Sorry, can you repeat that, please?
So the vacancy on the lands that are zoned for manufactured homes the vacancy is quite low. So
Okay.
yeah. So and some are underutilized, so taking a look at the lands that exist and perhaps increasing the density would be an option, infill, or another option would be creating more lands or rezoning lands for manufactured.
So what we're looking here at is, what we're looking at we have quite a few in Souq actually, of really nice looking sites where we have manufactured homes or trailer parks, that kind of thing. And what you're saying is that we reached pretty much capacity on those. We'd be looking at needing to zone additional lands in that direction. Now, my understanding is the land remains like it's basically managed, and one of the things that makes this affordable is you don't own the land. You're basically looking at a lease type option, and you're looking at a manufactured home, which again makes it less expensive. Do we have a price point, generally speaking, on what that would look like?
Oh, actually, yes. So we found all the average cost for each dwelling type. Is that what you mean? So if I remember correctly, it's hovering around $170,000 for a manufactured home in Souq. But if you're interested in a specific number, I could probably find it. But it's somewhere around there, yeah. I know exactly where it is. Yes.
When you say that, I'm just looking at the manufactured home park, given that there isn't an abundance of those on the South Island. Like, is that playing a factor? It's the case of, or with other municipalities not having any, that of course will increase the demand within our own municipality.
Because they're not
Because there are
available.
none anywhere else. So that would almost make it look like that's why our demand for them are high out here, because residents have no option anywhere else on the South Island. So that just, I'm not sure if I'm conveying this properly, but if every municipality had lands available for manufactured home parks and used them in that way, I mean, it's just, but are people moving out this way because there's nowhere else for them to be anywhere else in the CRD? In that case, we're housing everyone who's looking for that particular type of property.
That's actually a really interesting point, because through interviews in the survey, people said that they're still coming to Souq because it is still relatively less expensive than other communities. It's hard to say, you know, what would happen in that scenario because there's a lot of factors at play, but you know, the numbers do say that owning a manufactured home is significantly less expensive. So I do think that's an attractive factor for people. As far as bringing people from outside the community, because of that, it would be hard to predict what number that would be. But that's a good question.
Okay. Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, thank you very much for the report and staff for helping you out. I guess it was you and a team of people? Yeah? How many of you involved in this process?
It could involve up to 4 people at once.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's provided a lot of perspective. It's quite mind-blowing. There's an awful lot of content here. Very useful as we begin an OCP review process next year. And it's a great template for all the other communities that are going to need these affordable needs reports, right? 163 in BC. So good that you've got it almost right in one go with us. I'd suggest there's a few things that are missing that perhaps might be useful. I find, you know, you've identified here that we will need how many new homes per year? Was that 365 or new market homes?
So I have the numbers in front of me for every 5 years. So I think the number is less than that because every 5 years it's only 671 for owner, and then it was about 100 and something for renter occupied. So we differentiate between the two types of tenure. Yeah.
So I guess the missing piece for me here is that we do have quite a number of projects in development. My calculation is about 750 homes have been approved, development permits received. So it would be good to have, as an appendix to this document, a list of what's incoming over the next number of years.
Appendix that includes what is currently approved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I could cite any number of them. There's the Wadham's Farm property and Knottbrook Landing. There's lots, and I'm sure staff can help you put that together.
Yeah.
I'm just seeing an indication from Ms. Campbell that planning may be able to provide some materials to that effect.
Yeah.
I believe the requirements from the province for the housing needs assessments might not allow for the speculative development. We use those numbers when we are doing our TMP and our PTMP, and potentially with the economic analysis, which is another section of the work that Urbanics will be doing for us. But for the purposes of the housing needs assessment, and the consultant can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they have to use like actual numbers, building permit, development applications. So some of the new stuff that's coming in may not have counted towards, although the housing for Drennan is included, it's a current application. So if that helps.
So Wadham's Farm, for example, has not come to the table yet?
No. That one would have been included because it's a current application for development.
Right, okay.
Be.
It's just useful information to have if we were indeed needing to create as many as 671 market homes per year. I'd also interested in, I think one of your objectives is to create an inventory of those particular very specific lands, the RU, you've identified RU1 vacant and underutilized land. The zone with the highest vacant zone parcels are R1 and R2, representing 54 acres. So it'd be great to know exactly which areas you're referring to. I know there's a lot of town center R1 land that is sitting ready for rebirth. And I guess Aaron and Estates is an R2 property, but I'd be very interested, as again an appendix that shows us exactly those properties you're speaking of, if indeed we're to contemplate upzoning those properties. It's a fascinating document. I think a lot of it reflects what many of us in Souq have known for a long time. We are a quiet, small town at the end of, not the end of the highway, but we're the last stop before nature. We don't have a large commercial or industrial-based, create jobs locally. I'm interested, this is, a lot of your thinking is predicated on the thought that Souq will not evolve into more of a complete community, where more people will reduce that rate at 70%, I think 71%
Yeah,
are commuters.
Yeah.
So I think through our OCP, we're seeking ways to get people out of their cars and working locally. But I guess that we'll see in 5 years' time when this is done again.
Yes.
And I could go on, but I'll stop now.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Just to your point, Councillor Bateman, although the province may not recognize what is speculative, because this has a date on it, it would be helpful to capture sort of point in time so that in 5 years, should a council wish to do this again, then they can say, okay, 5 years ago, these were lands that were zoned and approved as such, and have they actually materialized into anything? Or are they still sitting vacant, in which case, what is going on with that particular property that is hindering its development? So for our internal use, so that everything is together, I think having that sort of data would be very helpful for our perspective. The province may not choose to use it, but this is our report.
To your worship, some of that will be captured in the utilized or underutilized plans, so you'll see if it's vacant or not, and if it
Okay.
was rezoned and then just sitting there, compared to if building permits were reached. But we can flesh out that part and maybe add a little bit of what we're coming, or what's coming our way, such as Wadham's Farm, or where we kind of know that that's going to be fleshed out.
Yeah, or any items that have received zoning at a certain part, we know what their names are, and just it was zoned for this. The presentation that was public at the time suggested that just down the road there was to be 100 and some patio type home development just down the road, and not Brook, I believe. The other phases of Sun River, like all of that is discussions that have had here in council. So if that is the demand that we're seeing that we need from this report, then it's a case of, okay, well, what's going on internally with that development that they're not, this is saying that that is in demand. So this would be timely to start developing those lands because there's a demand that's waiting to fill that. Okay, Councillor Logans?
Thank you very much for all the work that you put into this. It's so needed in this community, and it really helps solidify a lot of thoughts that we'd had but didn't really have the research to back up. So the other thing that I love about it is that it highlights that we're leading the country in co-housing, and that it also puts us in the forefront of these studies throughout the province. So I thank you and the staff for all of your time on this, and for all those who responded as well. I have a couple questions from the public that I wanted to bring forward. I feel like I might have the answers, but I'm just going to ask them on their behalf. One person wanted to know about the survey responses and if it's possible to have them included in the report, like all of them, or if that's appropriate.
So what we have done is include an appendix of the aggregated results, but we are not going to disaggregate it due to protection of people's identity and confidentiality. So that's available.
No, that's great, thank you. And then there was another question about why Souq is called affordable.
Why Souq is called affordable?
Right. Like, is it actually affordable? Because one of the questions
relative
of the
to the CRD.
Yes, yeah, and that's kind of what I thought is relative to the CRD. But it does sound like, according to the 82% who can't afford a home,
Yes.
It's clearly.
Yeah, right. So sorry if that was confusing. When I say affordable, it's just the prices are lower than the CRD. So it may be more attractive to buy a home here from outside the community.
Right, of course, thank you. And then there was another comment that there was no mention of Airbnb impacts. But I know that this study was more specific to our region. We don't really have a say on Airbnb in our
That's,
community.
we did look into temporary residence, where there seems to be an historical decline since 2011. But we're actually digging much deeper into Airbnb type of information for our economic analysis, which is complementary to this report. So you'll be seeing a lot more comment on that and research on that when we have that complete.
Awesome, thank you. I think that was about it. To me, it's very exciting to be able to go back to the Affordable Housing Committee and look at how we may be able to incorporate this with other district activities. Going forward with our OCP and other reports, it's going to be perfect timing to have this information and really focus on what needs to get done. I think that it really helps, like in my mind, everything makes sense. Nothing's quite shocking, but it, at the same time is shocking.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But it does help sort of frame what we need to do for our community infrastructure, for our walkability, for our economic development as well. So thank you very much for the comprehensive report.
Great, thank you.
Councillor St. Pierre?
Just a couple of more things. One thing is that I'll actually just repeat, the document itself is immensely helpful in actually confirming a lot of things that we pretty much suspected. One of the biggest ones for me was just the link between our local economy and affordable housing, and our need for affordable housing in order to actually have a thriving local economy, and some very specific suggestions in terms of how to get there, in terms of things like tiny lots and using the Housing Reserve Fund. I'll have a question about that in a moment.
Great.
and so on and so forth. So extremely pleased to have that link made explicit, because I think we've all known for some time that it's hard to keep people in the jobs that are actually available simply because they can't afford to live. And good to know that for sure. So the quick question I have there, though, is Housing Reserve Fund to address some of the persistent, this is, I don't remember which page because it's hard to tell on my digital document.
Sure, I know what you're talking
But
about.
to use the Housing Reserve Fund, what is that about? Is that,
It currently exists, actually.
and how is it used? And
It's
where is it?
used, well, the funds are going to be decided based on case by case. I believe this housing report, you going to answer that? Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, we currently have a housing reserve fund, and so we take cash in lieu and put that into the fund. We're using it to do this report, the reserve fund. So other municipalities can use it for like grant incentive programs for, say, retrofits or incentivizing people adding suites. There's tons of different options, and so what we need to look at is how we get funds into the reserve fund and then how we're going to use it. Historically, we haven't done as much as we can with it, and so this is the time for us to investigate kind of what's next. That helps you.
Yes.
Just to follow up on your comment, though, Councillor St. Pierre, whereas the case of smaller lots, smaller houses equals more affordability, I would kind of debate that, because it's still subject to the market and what's going to sell. And if it's proximity to water to assets, it's going to go on the market for whatever it is it's going to go for. It may be only worth so much, but if you have a beautiful house, and let's say it's 1,400 square feet, barrier-free, accessible, on a small, nicely landscaped lot, and those together are worth 400,000, it'll go on the market, it'll go for what it's going to go, and it's 700,000 and up. I mean, nothing's, it's subject to the market there. But in some cases, if we also, and this is probably more an OCP question, is actually looked at defining more commercial and light industrial lands, those would then help with the tax base, which would make taxes potentially more affordable, and then provide opportunities where there can actually be more places for business to invest and employment to be, so then people can live and work within the community. Because part of what makes us unaffordable is the transportation cost to other areas. So I just wouldn't want to see that our lands, we need to now start saying we need smaller lots and zone them all for residential use, because I think the commercial and industrial piece is missing desperately in our community. That, I'm only catching it.
I'm actually reasonably sure I would agree with you in almost all respects.
Okay.
As it happens. I do, however, think that one of the issues that we deal with is, I've been asked, where do you want to put this affordable housing? Kind of a little NIMBY question there. Where do you want to put this affordable housing? And my answer would be Victoria. I would love to see $600,000 homes in Victoria. as opposed to having to have $600,000 homes here, which means that people have to work in Victoria, come here to pay for them, and then commute on the
Yeah.
highway. So my thought is the 400 to 500 price point is not bad. The 300 price point is not bad. We need price points at different levels so that our community can actually expand in terms of its local economy. We need to actually have a lot of different options. Right now, we're allowing market forces, and I believe a hot market in terms of finding places to live for people in Victoria to drive our housing scene. And I don't think that's actually serving us particularly well. In terms of tiny lots, I'm just thinking that there's all sorts of options with taking land that already has infrastructure, already has all those amenities, and we've already paid heavily to have that infrastructure put into place, to actually make sure that it has the high density we need, the 4 stories or whatever it is that's actually going to provide the housing that we actually need. So allowing a really solid product that is known to sell to drive the future of our housing is not, I think, what we should be doing at this point in time. And I think the report reflects that. We need to step in and actually decide what we want for affordable housing.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Logans?
Great discussion, and just building off of that, we do need to increase our density, but then more housing obviously means more cars and traffic on a road that can't really sustain it. But what if we were to build our density downtown, make that density walkable, provide local economic opportunities for people who are still working to remain in the community? Then that traffic is off the road, and it's one less infrastructure worry for us. It's really interesting to me in this report that the age group of 45 plus is the biggest target for these homes. There are people who want nice homes, a bit more affordable, but in the I guess life affordable, not just house affordable. And that's a great way to do it, is just build it as a community rather than just lots here and there that happen to be smaller, if that makes sense.
May I make a comment to that? So with the introduction of new housing, the idea is too that there'd be turnover. So maybe older adults that are living in homes that have large lots, high maintenance. They're looking for something that's low maintenance and ground oriented, but still smaller. So, you have people moving out of this home, that opens it up to the market, and it's going to be more affordable than a brand new house. So there's turnover that can make all housing products a little bit more affordable.
Yes, and that point also works with the research that was done, I think it was last year or so. It might have even been done in the previous OCP at some point, dating back quite a while, but the idea of the community nodes, where we have different regions within the municipality that have little community nodes to make them more walkable. Or if we have a large development, can we try to build a community feel out of that area as well? So if there are pockets of residential areas, we can make them a bit more sustainable.
No, it's an interesting report. And I look forward to some public comment on this, because one could argue that if you're in your mid-40s, and there's children and work and all that, you actually have less time in your garden. It would be actually more appealing to have less garden to maintain. So then when you retire, you don't have your dog and your children are older, you would actually spend more time and have more time in your garden than you do right in the middle of raising children, when you don't have time to garden at all. So that sort of suggestion, and I think of my in-laws who are still in their home in Surrey, their yard is what they enjoy doing. My father-in-law is 85, and he likes puttering about his yard and having space and doing things with plants and growing different things. Whereas when they were in the middle of looking after their children or their grandchildren, they would not have had that extra time. So I think maybe that's a bit more, personal. But you think, people are busy, they're commuting, they're working, they have to take their kids to hockey games or this and that. There is not a lot of time to deal with yard work. But when your children get older, you would have more time, unless your children are interested in gardening, right? So it'll sort of vary there. You may have a larger dog, which is why a larger yard is more appealing for animals and the like to have. So that sort of varies as well. But I think it just, the housing options. Curious, one question though, in terms of, and I'll get right with you, Councillor Logans, is the housing type where there's folks or people that are on too big a house. And I think sometimes if the house was designed that it had a full bathroom, there's always the case of many of our 2-bedroom houses in Sooke have a half bathroom or a powder room on the main floor with a den, your living space, and then your full bathroom and bedrooms are upstairs. If the den was a little bit bigger and there was an actual full bathroom on the main floor, people would be able to age in place much longer because then they don't have to worry about steps. They might choose to use the den as a bedroom and they have a full bathroom. So is that a recommendation, like just to builders, then people could actually just stay in their house much longer?
That's funny you mentioned that. A part of the recommendations, we recommend attracting remodeling businesses through different type of economic strategies because we see that as a growing need here. So remodeling is a huge benefit to aging in place.
But then if the house, and I'll just chime in a bit, if the house is already on a small lot with the setbacks, the ways to expand or remodel would become very difficult or very expensive if you actually wanted to remodel the house. Whereas if there was a full bathroom already there, you know, then you wouldn't have to do it. So I think it's sort of a conversation that I hope our building, you know, just contemplate. I think it makes a big difference. I mean, I look at my own house, there's no way we could expand out because we're right, it's too close. Like with the variance, it wouldn't be possible. So we could never make, unless we then went into our garage and moved our kitchen out the other way, which becomes this much bigger project. It's not just on the one, because going out the one side isn't possible. And I know we're not alone in that area. So if you have smaller, if you've already gone in that way where the layout, it wouldn't be a possibility even if there was a good renovation company because the yard setbacks are too narrow. You couldn't do it. Councillor Logans.
There is a need for local food, and I'm sure Councillor St. Pierre can talk for hours on that with lots of expertise. But I think that speaking about not having time to garden is perhaps just one perspective. And it doesn't really take into account the need for the changes we need to make to keep our community sustainable. We should really be focused on reducing the travel and making sure that families have time to be at home and garden with their kids. And I know I have friends in their mid-30s who garden with their kids, and it's because they have the opportunity to work from home and work locally. So that's something that this really strikes for me, is that we can provide those opportunities, or at least strive to provide them for those who may be who may be in the working age range, and provide multiple housing options, which is clearly what we're lacking. But keeping people here and keeping them local, I think across the board, is going to be what our focus is. And on that note, we can do more with our co-housing. It doesn't have to be only seniors co-housing. We can have family co-housing as well. So those are the types of options that we can bring forward. And I think it's time for us to be a bit more creative, seeing as we are leading the way in various areas with this housing report.
Great, thank you. Councillor Bateman, then Councillor St. Pierre.
Yeah. I find these population growth projections really quite interesting, because we as a community do have the option through our zoning process to either encourage more or discourage people from coming to Souq. So the fact that you predicted 364 new residents per year is based on 2016 measures. And so we as a council and a community get to determine to some degree the numbers of people incoming. I particularly like, you noted, I think in the report, that seniors, or the 75 plus, own quite a significant chunk of the market housing stock. So the ability for them, as the mayor was saying, to downsize and to get into the heart of town, in our town center, into rental units or condos is rather critical because that frees up existing housing for these incoming individuals. Also, I noted in Strategy 1, you've got 10.11 in the Housing Needs Report, enhanced density on properties that are already serviced with municipal water and sewer lines, particularly in existing urban properties. I'm wondering whether a statement like that needs to have a subclause related to phased development through the sewer specified area. Because as Councillor Logans was saying, it's our town center, our smart growth principles. This is where we need to get the density first, I would think, in priority sequence. And then as we move out into the further reaches of that sewer specified area, that'd be further down the road.
It's an interesting
None of these are
point.
questions, of course,
Yeah.
but feel free to comment.
I'm actually remarking on it. Thank you for pointing that out.
Councillor St. Pierre?
Just a few responses. One of them was actually also to the gardening, whether people have time to garden. I tend to agree that often yards are actually not particularly used. I'm interested in new development practices that would allow for community gardens and maybe even local dog parks that are actually part of a development. I know that there's not a lot of interest in row homes or in the kind of densification necessarily, but I think this is where in some ways we can see whether or not we could be proactive instead of reactive. Do we react to the market, or do we dictate that we actually want a certain type of product? Allotment gardens or community gardens allow us to actually aggregate small parcels that wouldn't actually be much use for farming or for growing food, because you've got this house in the way that's putting shade on everything and it's just not that great. You can actually take all those scraps, put them together, and actually have a decent space, and then people can make use of it when they actually need it in terms of their lifestyles. So there's options, I think, in that direction. I'm also interested in this whole thing of a market driven by 45 plus, when I don't know anybody that serves coffee that's over 45. We have a few good coffee shops in town. Where do those people get to live? So we actually have a need to serve other demographics, and pushing ourselves to actually continue providing housing for 45 plus ignores our need to actually have places for our graduates from our schools, our young people to actually live. And that's actually a concern to every part of the population. We have people who'd like their kids to actually stay in town, and there's nowhere for them to live. So I think that even though we do have obviously a demand that will continue existing because these people have money, we know that, I'm one of them, to a point, I'm a farmer, whatever. Still, we have to actually be able to serve the people who are just starting out, that are just beginning careers, that are actually working at minimum wage or just above. And so this would be a proactive approach instead of just saying, this is what the market's demanding, this is what we'll produce. And I would caution us to go in that direction, to not go in that direction, I should say.
Okay, final point, and then I'd like to open it up for public, if we can. Councillor Logans?
Thank you, Tony St. Pierre, for bringing up, sorry, I was just reading, I'm like, who is this? Councillor St. Pierre, for bringing up the allotment gardens, because I remember that we did have a discussion at some point about park dedication and how perhaps that could include community gardens, and then perhaps that's something that council can direct towards the Affordable Housing Committee, and they can have a discussion there on what that might look like.
You can mention it. I think it depends on where it is, because wildlife still needs a habitat that you wouldn't want in your garden. Yeah, so this is going to the committee, I believe. Yeah, okay.
I had one more question.
Okay.
This School District 62, I don't think you've included among the employers in Souq on page 9. Was that an oversight, or did I miss that?
I included district of Sooke, but not the school district. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, school district,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay, I can
Just
include it
to-
separately, sure.
add that.
They would be they're a larger employer than the district
Yeah.
is, given the number of staff in the schools.
Right.
And I don't mean to nitpick, but our population at the last census was 13,001.
A one.
So just add that one,
know,
because that could be, that's our mystery guest, who is our
Go
future.
back to the drawing board.
Okay, good.
Just a question to Ms. Machada. Do you recall offhand with how many new recordings were made to the voter list between our 2018 general election and the recent by-election?
Thank you, Your Worship. I do. Our voter registration went up approximately 500 voters in 10 months.
500 voters in 10
Yeah, it
months.
was approximately 9,800 in October of 2018, and our most recent by-election, which we printed in August, was at 10,304.
Okay. That's just, I think, good data to include. It doesn't say how many households that is, but it does show there's a growth there.
We can use the average rate, which has been 3.2%, and project to now, which would be hovering around 14,000.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you very much for the presentation. I would like to invite members of the public up, so I'll need you to
Oh, sure.
shift
Move.
into the audience, please.
Yes.
So I'd like to invite any members of the public. So this will be on this particular item, the Souq Housing Needs Report. If you have any comments, questions, feedback, ideas?
Ellen Lors. I have a couple questions and comments. The community nodes in the OCP is in the OCP, so that was good comment, Councillor Loggins. How many building permits were issued? Is that included in the amount of homes? Because you were asked, like, Councillor Bateman asked how many, that there was how many homes that were 700 applications available, but how many building permits have been issued? Was that included in the amount of homes?
So some things will be in like a rezoning or development permit, and they don't reach, so those are for building permits that were issued. The CRD, as well as the District of Sooke, keeps all of our records in that. So this report is based on our historical building permits from the time of incorporation until 2018. Anything that's in the works that hasn't reached building permit stage wouldn't have been included in that tally.
Okay, so the building permits have been, thank you. Also, the support from the province from Aging in Place for home care. So there is support from the province to have people age in place and not necessarily go into senior homes or smaller homes. Another question in the report, are seniors looking for homes? Are they looking, is that part of what we're looking for? Because here you're saying 45 to 55 or 54 are the larger number, but are also seniors looking for homes? Do we have to supply homes for seniors is, I guess, basically the question. Because I didn't see that as being showing that it was that we needed to provide homes for seniors. And what's the age group of the people that are living homeless? Do we have a number
We have
for
the
that?
point in time count that was taken that gave out so many, but I don't know that it gave the
No, so
age.
typically on average, point in time counts don't include average age. And also generally when you have a consultant dealing with like a sensitive matter such as that, they'll go through the appropriate support societies, et cetera, and just find out numbers. We won't have that detail. It would be those resource societies might have a median age or can give you an average of where they think that those people that they're servicing are about in their time.
Yeah, I think that'd be interesting to have that average because there's where we're looking for a lot of people who are really living homeless. And also debt ownership and at-risk landowners, I think that's something you would need to look at because a lot of landowners are maxed out in their debts as well, and a 1% increase in interest would move them out of their homes. So I think that's something that we should be looking at as well. Again, I think the Mayor addressed that as well, the small lot decrease of housing by, I don't believe that it's going to decrease the cost of the housing, small lots. the price of building a house is the same, and if they build out max on the lot, that's still the price of the building the house is going to be there, and of course, the market's going to push that as well. So I don't think small lots are the answer either. So the 12,000 to 14,000 fee simple homes, for what age is that request for?
Can you let me know, what page are you on, Mrs. Lors?
Pardon me?
Are you referencing a data that's on a page?
Yes.
Which page, sorry, and then I can flip
gosh.
to it.
Good question. It's a big document. It was presented, there's 12,000 to 14,000 for simple homes. But for whom was that? What age group are we looking at?
That
that for?
was, Counselor Bateman is saying that's from the Realtor and made that recommendation?
I think the Realtor, and you were quoted in the report, states that ground level townhomes or half duplexes are in demand, as well as ground level patio non-strata townhomes, 12 to 1,600 square feet, or 14.
But
So
we
that's
don't
the
know for
top
whom.
demand that they're hearing from
Right.
I guess the buying public, because I think it would be inappropriate for the Realtor to ask people what their age was unless they offered it.
Well,
Kind of a weird question.
yeah, like if they're really young or, yeah,
Yeah.
families or I guess I was looking at, is it for families or is it for seniors? Like, what is that age group looking for 12 to 14,000 homes? Just a question. Yeah, everybody? Okay. Local affordability, single family. So local affordability for family homes, in that same concept, is that, how many bedrooms? Is that for 3 bedrooms or is that for 1 bedroom? Again, what size are we looking for and what are we looking for? If over 30% of income for rental is not allowed, then what about purchasing? If they're over 30% of their income is going for purchasing, that's not affordable either. If the 30% for rental isn't affordable, neither is 30% of their income for purchasing affordable. Just a comment. Movable homes, and a good question, that was my question too. What are you talking about, movable homes? Manufactured homes, and that's been talked about for a long time, manufactured homes, and at one point, one OCP, there was not going to be any manufactured homes allowed outside of the town centre. And there are manufactured homes in Saanich, there are manufactured homes in Esquimalt, there's manufactured homes in Virol, so they are around. And I remember when we did the OCP, the question when we asked seniors what was affordable, where would they like to live, they said manufactured home park, because it was affordable, number one. Number two, they're around other people, so they weren't alone. So it's something like the co-housing, but they had their own space, and also they could grow tomatoes or whatever they want to do as well. So that's something to keep in mind. And with the movable homes, does that also include camping units and RVs? Because if you've been watching the news, more and more people are camping and on the roadsides because that's affordable, because they can afford a camper or they can afford an RV and move it around, park it. I think that's something we have to look at, because right now our bylaw only allows you to be 6 months on a site. That's our bylaw. But because we have a larger piece of property, you wouldn't believe the amount of emails or calls I have in the past. We bought a camper, can we camp at your place? It was a constant. So there's a need. I'm just saying that there's a need for people to have that space. And that's something that could be addressed in a bylaw. With the co-housing units, you're saying 350 in a wait list. Does this include the new co-housing units that are coming up as well?
I think it's both.
It's both? And do we have
It's only the one, it's only Harborside.
only Harborside? Because there's another one, right?
Yeah. 250 on the other list.
250 on the other list?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have numbers for the wait list to get into Air Manor?
I think that's in the report.
It's in the non-market housing.
It's in the non-market housing.
Non-market housing,
Yeah.
right. Because that's also an opportunity there, because Air Manor is looking to develop but more space. Again, same comments with 45 to 54, large number coming up. So again, generally speaking, that'd be 3-bedroom, because those would be family units. And yes, more lots with larger lots and some small lots, but mostly larger lots, because the opportunity should be there for people to grow their own food. And if it's smaller lots, there should be community gardens. That fits with the OCP as well, because generally speaking, we just don't have the land or the people to grow enough food. So people should be able to, if they want to. It's their choice. And it doesn't matter what the age is as far as growing your own food and raising your own kids, because we've all done that for centuries. So it can work. Another question with the shifts to smaller homes for elderly. The opportunity for granny homes and tiny homes is another opportunity that should be looked at as far as our bylaws to change them. It's quite interesting, because I was looking on Amazon of all places, and tiny homes that are pretty nice looking, 39,000 tiny homes, all inclusive. You just have to build them on your lot. So those are just my comments from and I thank you for the people who did the report, but there's still more work to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lors. Other comments from the members of the public? Can you please turn on the microphone, Ms. Logans?
Thank you again, Your Worship. Nikki Logans. I'm a member of the Affordable Housing Committee. Thank you so much. Great report. Really looking forward to reconvening our committee. It's been in hiatus for a while, and looking forward to your report. On the other hand, I'm also looking to complete the work of that committee. And with that in mind, I want to ask a question about how I note in the report that you have you've prioritized high, medium, low. If I may ask how that was done, was it through your own analysis, or was it informed by information that you collected?
Sir, I'll need you to come
Sorry.
to a microphone so we can
Thank you.
hear the answer.
So yeah, I guess my questions are mostly for the consultants.
Okay.
We can share.
Yeah, sure. So that was based on how effective those strategies would be under which the objective they were listed. So
Yes.
each strategy within that objective is, oh, thank you.
You might as well stay.
Yeah, might as well. So it was based on that. Does that help? So
Can you repeat
yeah,
that?
So it was ordered within that objective. So there's 5 objectives. For example, address market rate housing, and there's several strategies under that, because that's quite a vague or broad thing. So then we ordered those strategies as to what would achieve best that objective, which was, for example, address market rate housing.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
And hopefully the shortest amount of time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's several things.
Yeah, I'd appreciate if you stayed, because
yeah.
I just, mostly my questions are for you about the report.
Sure.
Because we'd like to, as a committee, make a really good, make some good recommendations. So the other question is about the rental units, and I admit I didn't read the full report, but the piece around rental units spoke to the cost. Was there any work done to determine how many homes have rental units in them, or what that are not, apartment buildings or something like that?
Oh, you mean like secondary suites?
Yeah, is that in the report?
The number of secondary suites, no.
Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't think I was missing something. Thanks. Is there a way that can be added to the information?
We may,
It's in the building permit information, so if we have the suite on record, so that their numbers are there that we can add.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes, I do have a comment about the remodeling. I really was taken by your comments, the comments from the mayor and the councilors about remodeling. I don't know whether there is an opportunity to, I mean, there was lots of comments made about setbacks, and I know in other places, people have the opportunity to have what where I grew up, they call them Wendy houses or garden houses, or on larger lots to have the opportunity to have an aging parent perhaps live in an apartment above a garage or a Wendy house type place. So is there, and I think the committee needs to look at whether there's an opportunity for council to look at zoning regulations that permit more than one building that would impact lot coverage and setbacks and those kinds of things that might be able to support better housing opportunities.
And that would be, it would be an interesting conversation that I hope the committee has, and just with a recommendation. The only thing, though, is that you could have homeowner one put a secondary house, say garden house, and then the next homeowner buys it and then turns that into an Airbnb. So then what sort of regulatory framework, because then that defeats the purpose.
Yep.
It wasn't meant, so I think that would be the piece that I would be looking for, is to certainly have zoning for that intent. But will that be the intent that materializes? The unintended consequence is that it's an Airbnb. So then it's more traffic. It doesn't do anything, doesn't provide any additional unit. It just becomes a different means. Yes, it will help. And then if the house itself is rented out, then you couldn't even argue that it's a mortgage saver if the primary house has been rented and then the supplementary one is an Airbnb. Because that is an issue that local governments are facing all over the place. So that would be the other piece to that conversation I'd like to see answered.
Yep. Along those lines, yes, looking at more creative solutions. Very exciting to hear about the situation with co-housing, and your comment, Councillor Logan's, about co-housing being extended to beyond seniors. It was noted, and we'll bring that forward in the committee for sure. The other kind of housing that comes to my mind is temporary housing on farmlands, or and I don't know that the district has much opportunity to address that, but that's something we could look at. And of course, tiny homes and other such creative solutions. Lot coverages. Yeah, I think that's all my questions for now. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you. I'm looking forward to reconvening our committee.
Thank you, Ms. Logans. And just for clarity with the committee, they did sort of go on a deliberate hiatus, waiting for the outcome of this report. So that was why it was recessed for so much time. But now there is a date scheduled, so they'll be able to pick up the work. And then we'd be looking at council then to look at the terms of reference, extend the term, and then if needed to advertise for other public members because of that timing.
I do have a question about whether the consultants will be available to the committee beyond the publication of the report.
I'm uncertain. I'll turn that to staff.
I'm uncertain too, but I will know by the time we have that meeting for sure. And we'll let you know as we take the feedback from this meeting and throughout, because of when that meeting is, right before the December 9th. I think we'll be okay to have a little bit of back and forth, but whether they'll come in person to the meeting, no, probably.
In this case, the report is turned into council, and then our staff will look to do the further refinements. So there would be staff support at that meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Logans. Are there members of the public today on this item?
Loretta Deutscher, Sooke. Just a comment. For people with some mobility issues, Many of the rental opportunities that are one bedroom, have just a bathtub with a shower in the bathtub. It limits mobility, and thank you, Mayor Tate, for drawing that to the attention of the public. It is a real issue. It makes it more affordable. If you want to have a walk-in shower, then one needs to look at 2 bedrooms, which again affects the cost of your living arrangement. And it's significant. There's a great deal of difference between the price for a 1-bedroom rental unit and a 2-bedroom unit. There's very, very few 1-bedroom places that have a walk-in shower that are accessible to somebody who has mobility issues. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Ms. Deutscher. The Minister Simpson is doing accessibility consultation throughout the province right now with the intent of legislation coming forward next year. So it'll be interesting to see if there's any early findings on accessibility that we could incorporate into this. That might be more suitable for our official community plan, but in terms of what is to be the built environment and if there's going to be changes, I don't know what the changes to legislation, of course, will look like because it's going through public now, but if it's funded by the province, it's likely they're going to want to see universal accessibility through all units being built in the built environment.
Your Worship,
It's
so
rental housing.
ideally, that would be seen built into the provincial building code.
Yes.
We can speak in the OCP about universal accessibility and community design, but it doesn't give us the ability, we can use motherhood statements about encouraging universal design for inside buildings, but that's really down to building code, and maybe there's an opportunity in our building bylaw, but not necessarily to the detail I think you're looking for in the OCP. That wouldn't be the place.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Other speakers this evening or this afternoon? I'll just go for if there's any first time, and then I'll go for a second. I'm not seeing any first time. So welcome back, Ms. Lures, for second time.
Hi, there's just 2 questions that I forgot to ask. Were the units at Knox included in this count?
At Knox Vision, they were the
They were
apartment building.
included?
Yeah.
Yes.
And what about the units that are to be developed on Drennan? Were they included?
Yes, so all 245 of the BC housing units that we know are coming were included in the count for non-market.
Okay, and the Drennan units, how many units were they? And were they specific for seniors or?
The Drennan units, there's 170. They have a mix of rental rolls for there, and it's a mix of 1-bedrooms, a few bachelors, all the way up to 3-bedroom. But at this time, a housing provider, I don't have knowledge about who they've decided to operate, and so I'm not sure who the target tenant is.
Okay, so we still don't know how many 3-bedroom units are available in that mix?
We do know the number of 3-bedroom units, and we know the number of universal accessible units. I'm not sure if they're going to be targeted towards seniors or towards families. That will depend on the provider that the CRD and BC Housing awards to.
Okay, I just asked that because there seems to be more people looking for 3 bedrooms. A lot of single-family parents are looking for 3 bedrooms, and they're just not there. So it's just a question. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other final comments from members of the public here today? Comments from members of council? So this is already being planned to go to the Affordable Housing Committee. Councillor St. Pierre?
I'm just curious, it's going to go to the Affordable Housing Committee, of course, because that's where it should go. But I noticed, especially in the high priority items, there's a lot there that we may already have partially in place. It seems like there's a lot of potential low-hanging fruit. Are we expecting staff at this point to go through the report and, let us know what we should be moving on, or are we waiting for that to come through the Affordable Housing Committee? How do we move forward? This is great information. It gives us clear direction. How do we move forward as effectively as possible? I guess is my question.
So what I heard was that staff are going to be doing some wrap-up work, some more work on this with feedback from today and whatever else they receive through the public. The Affordable Housing Committee will deliberate over their day, and then it's coming back to a regular council meeting, December 9th. So it'll come back, unless I think, depending on how the discussion goes at Affordable Housing Committee, it would come to a regular council meeting to be adopted as a plan, unless they put forward a different suite of recommendations. Okay. Ms. Campbell?
So on December 9th, the intent is that the final report would get adopted through resolution by council and then would have to be published on our website per the legislative requirements. And the province will use that information over the next 5 years. We would use it to update some of our housing policies, potential housing strategy in the OCP. And remember, this is a housing needs assessment, not just affordable housing. So it's giving us a lot of guidance as to, preparing us when negotiating with developers on future development in the community. But yes, remember, it's not just affordable housing.
Okay. Follow-up, Councillor St. Pierre?
So based on what I've just heard, we'll be receiving the report and adopting a final report on December 9th. And what I'm really looking for at this point is how soon can we actually take some of the recommendations and strategies and work that's been done here, turn it into either policies, which would be, I guess, for the staff to do, or do we need specific, resolutions coming from council? How quickly can we actually, that would happen post-December 9th, but what would the process then be? Are we still looking at recommendations from staff or recommendations within the Affordable Housing Committee? How do we make this go-go?
Mr. McInnes?
Thank you, Your Worship. You'll see later on the agenda today is Council's strategic plan, and 3.6 on that plan deals with affordable housing. That has not been prioritized as one of the top 6 priorities in the 3 goals and 18 objectives that Council has provided to administration at this point. So we will be meeting again to prioritize the remainder of those objectives, and that may move up the ladder at that point in time. But right now, it is not identified as a now objective.
Okay. Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, I had a few things. I wish I could answer Mrs. Luer's questions in turn. I didn't write them all down, but there are 60 apparently on the wait list at Ayr Manor, just so you know. And yes, this housing action plan does identify 3 major high priorities: the enhanced density in sewer specified area, increase the rental housing supply, ensure adequate accessibility in housing for seniors, so i.e. universal design in all new builds, ideally, and also retrofit the older housing with accessibility features. It seems I'd suggest we need to move with patience on this one, receive it for information. This is key fundamental material for the OCP review. And once, this will be one of those foundational documents that, and when we come out of the far side of that, then we'll have a much better idea of where we want to be. I also want to just go to the staff report at the outset here. And I note that the housing needs report was originally posted to meet the transitional legislation requirements, which meant a full report would not be necessary. And now, because the legislation has changed, the Local Government Act was modified in the spring, and that means that we need to now complete a full report. The RFP came in at, I think, $42,900, but to get to that full report, we have to pay another $8,000. Now, I did go online and found on the BC government website, housing needs report started before April 2019. And the quote is, local governments that were already working on or that have completed a housing needs report before April 2019 may be considered to have met the legislative requirement for the first report. So the question of whether we need to pay this extra $8,000 to take it to another stage from our Housing Reserve Fund, which has all of $92,000 in it. It's not a big chunk of change. But so anyway, I throw all that out just for contemplation.
To answer you, Councillor Bateman, when we received the UBCM grant funding, that was actually what triggered us to have to do a full report, because if you got that funding, you had to answer a full report. We also hadn't started at the time for the transitional. That was our intention. It's just when the legislation got adopted, we actually didn't know when, and then it did over the summer, and we received the UBCM report. So all of these things sort of came to a head, and we decided that the Souq amount that we put forward would remain the same at the $42,900, with that outstanding $7,900 needing to be clearly moved over from the reserve. And then the $20,000 from the UBCM grant would be used to supplement the housing needs report aspect, the economic analysis, and some of the extraneous information that we have in the report is all being funded by us, if that clears that up for you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess the key is that we didn't start before April, and it's in the UBCM requirements. And so what we're seeing now is a 90% complete report, effectively. Okay.
Okay, so there is a recommendation here today, and that is that we accept this report for today's review and discussion. Moved by Councillor St. Pierre, so that the Committee of the Whole accept the Housing Needs Report for information discussion. Moved by Councillor St. Pierre. Any further discussion? Call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Okay, great. We're moving on to our second item now, 3.2, which is the Northeast Quadrant Lot A Task for Business Cases. I'll turn this over to staff, please.
I believe we're going to defer to Councillor Bateman, who has been chairing this committee.
Thank you, Mr. CAO, for that. So yes, this Northeast Quadrant Lot A Task Force, the background on this, well, I guess from the top note, in our council strategic plan, under our red priorities, was to facilitate phased development of Lot A through planning, partnerships, and advocacy. It's immediately followed by develop a new official community plan. Phase one of this phased development is underway with the lease for the library. Phase two, it was determined by council in the spring, or early summer, was that we have a look at this northeast quadrant of Lot A, or the NEQLA, as we came to call it informally. It was not in our mandate to look at any of the other quadrants. We looked specifically as a starting point and a continuation of the Souq Lot A final report, which was released in May by through a partnership of Key Corp, Stantec, and the District of Souq. And this had gone through a full public process. We convened a really strong group, I felt, backed by Ms. Royer-Collard and Ms. Campbell from the district, and the group who largely are here today. Thank you for coming out. Rick Robinson, the board chair of the Souq Region Community Health Network and co-chair of the newly formed Souq and Juan de Fuca Health Foundation, whose mission is to encourage philanthropy in support of health-related programs and facilities in the Souq region. Carol Panalski, president of the Souq Seniors Drop-In Center, who's been battling hard for a dedicated senior center for many years now. Godfrey Medhurst from the Souq Lions Club was on the task force. He's former director of campus planning at the University of Northern BC. So another very talented, knowledgeable gentleman. Andrew Moore was on the committee as a member of the Souq Region Community Health Network's Age-Friendly Committee. Among much else, he has been a key figure in developing Souq's reputation for co-housing and these new models of community living. Mary Dunn joined the committee as we unfolded. She stepped in for Rick, I think, at one meeting, and stayed for Andrew at one meeting and stuck around. Former Councillor Dave Bennett, who's here today, former Drop-In Society board member, attended one of our meetings in lieu of Carol at one point. Councillor Beddoes attended a number of sessions, asked some tough questions, and sought clarity about our terms of reference, which were a little confused at the outset, but we think we've come to an understanding about that now. We also had some guests. Macola's CEO Kevin Albers and BC Housing Senior Project Manager Christine Bailey joined us as well. So the task force has come up with the 4 business cases that have been circulated in today's agenda. I must note that as you know, the task force had its moments, one of them being the withdrawal of the Lions from the task force in late August on the grounds that we were overly focused on housing. And I will acknowledge that this is indeed true. The task force was naturally biased towards a project that matched a seniors youth activity center with a nonprofit affordable rental housing concept. And as you'll see in the history section of our business cases, that this indeed was the recommendation of the Lot A final report that Council endorsed back on May 27th. It was discussed in early deliberations by the previous Council. The closing recommendation of the Community Center Advisory Committee. The key point it made was that a provincially funded housing project would be able in large part to also fund the Senior Youth Activity Center. So having that natural bias, we did in fact move forward with the mission of providing council, as our terms of reference stated, with as wide a range of options as possible. So at the behest of the Lions, and because it's a great idea, at our second meeting, we brought forward what has evolved into Business Case C for Council's consideration. So those 4 options. The option A for development of the Northeast Quadrant is a District of Sooke directed development entirely. Option B is a public partnership with a housing component. Option C is public partnership without housing. And option D is if we were to sell off this chunk of land and have it developed by an interested company according to expression of interest or request for proposals that we would come up with, based in large part on the Lot A master plan with tweaks. So to carry on just a little longer, options A, B, and D are effectively variations of each other in that they are based on the Lot A report recommendations, namely a multi-story building with a senior youth activity center on the ground and at grade levels, topped by 3 or more stories of housing. And possibly in wedding cake fashion, we could also include a bonus extra floor that might include any number of some of the options that are cited in the business cases, such as telecommunication, business center, or a childcare space, art studios, even a distance learning center is another opportunity. Because once you start building this thing, there are chances to add other needs in the community. Option C reflects the desires of the Lions for a standalone structure minus any housing component. And the Lions have indeed long been seeking to build a modern gathering space for their own 3 clubs as well as other community groups in town. They're seeking meeting rooms, reception space for weddings and family parties, an industrial kitchen, video conference center, possibly a daycare center. The Lions have also been open to including the Seniors Youth Activity Center in this concept. And, back at the time of the Getting It Built study, in 2014, the Souq Lions Club is interested in, quote, this is out of the report, the Souq Lions Club is interested in partnering in the project as they have land that could be swapped or leveraged. They also have funding in place that could be leveraged. The Lions would rather this be a community-driven project without direct municipal involvement. So in option C, you'll see that the district's contributing the land, which is valued at about $500,000. And then it's up to the group that would come together to develop the land and create an operating model to take it from there. And of course, I put potentially with the Senior Youth Center, which would trigger the reserve fund, we have $252,000 set aside for the senior youth activity center. So, I welcome questions. We will be able to hear from some of the task force members during public comment period. I'll save concluding remarks for later. So, but anyone has some questions? I'm wide open.
Just to thank you, Councillor Bateman, for chairing this through the summer. Just spending that time with the various community members and bringing this forward. So just want to extend my thank you for that. And yeah, kind of like Councillor Logan's.
Yeah, I'll just open it up by saying that I'm very grateful for the extra work that you and the committee did on this. Just like Mayor Tate mentioned, has a lot of work over the summer as well. I don't consider, with all due respect to the hardworking Lions, I don't consider option C an option, as it doesn't take in consideration the needs of the community, which are clearly outlined in the report that we had completed over the past year. So I'm definitely leaning more towards an expression of interest, as it feels to me like the work has been done, and let's move forward. Let's see what kind of interest we may have in the community or outside of the community, and see what ideas might pop up to make this happen, especially in regards to multi-millions of dollars in funding. So hopefully that can be with a housing partner as well. It would be really great to see that happen. It's part of a great need in our community, and it's part of what is wanted on this lot by the community. So my initial thoughts.
And that's, you're referring to the housing report that we just received? Yeah, okay. Councillor St. Pierre?
Just to clarify, an expression of interest would be option D, I believe? Or are we looking?
In general,
sure,
option D, that direction.
Okay, just clarifying.
I think it's the case of, maybe Councillor Logan's, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's just, okay, we have the SHRET report, we have these reports, and then putting it out to see what comes back. Yeah. And how it would actually be achieved. Okay. Is the big one, is some municipalities have done that with success. And then Esquimalt is progressing in that direction to have some community amenities done, and they're partnering with the developer to get it done.
Yes, sorry, that is what I meant exactly, as that, just as you stated, it's been successful in other communities. It's kind of what other communities do to get these sort of works done.
Okay, so this could potentially include a housing component, or who knows what. It's really, putting the information out there and then seeing what bites we get back, correct? Okay, the only other thing that I meant to offer was that I don't think, and I think this document makes it fairly clear in some ways, that option A is necessarily what we should be pursuing, and this is more on lines of eliminating down to what seem like the more reasonable options. I don't think that the district has the capacity to manage such a project, so maybe that's an option that could be taken off the table. Just putting it out there.
Yeah, and just to
Just
follow
for
up,
clarity,
that's sort of exactly what I completely agree. We go in that direction. We're seeking potentially partners in the community through an expression of interest as well, because it may be that someone can take on a whole project, or it could be that there's organizations who can take on pieces of it, and we're working with other groups to accomplish that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be neutral here, but I would agree that option A should come off the table. It's a bridge too far for the district at this stage in its history. Very intensive on staffing and the hiring of new staff to run this project. Option B would also require a request for proposals to housing needs, social housing societies. Because option B is rooted in the BC housing, the possibility of getting as much as $15 to $20 million from BC housing, particularly now that we have this housing needs assessment, which clearly states that we do need more rental, affordable rental, non-market housing. So there would be a request for proposals, and I guess everything is going to be, we do have this master plan, you know, the Stantec and Key Corp and the planning department have quite a precise model, and yeah. And then option D also would again involve a public-private scenario. And a draft RFP for potential use on Lot A has been developed already by Key Corp in the district. And again, this ideally would be a mix of the Seniors Youth Center, Activity Center with housing atop it. Yeah.
Councillor St. Pierre?
I appreciate, obviously, given our recent report of today on the needs for housing. I do, however, also think that we need desperately office space and commercial space, and that depending on what kind of nibbles we get back, I would be possibly more inclined towards having that sort of thing. And I especially am interested in having the densification happen. So the two-story, not so interested. One way or another, I think we need to have a bit of modeling happening with Lot A in terms of what we actually want for the future of the downtown or the, you know, the town center. So I'm looking at, you know, ideally more than 2 stories, 4 to 6 would be best. I'd be very interested in seeing commercial space. There's been some talk of, you know, municipal offices and so on and so forth. I think all of that would be highly appropriate. I think that the area around Lot A can also be redeveloped in terms of affordable housing. I believe that we're looking at a potential turnover in the future of some of the lots around there, which would lend themselves really well to that sort of development, and then provide the densification directly around services provided within Lot A. So one way or another, I'd like us to definitely be looking at those extra stories of space as we look at these proposals coming in potentially.
So just to that, is it not reasonable, like, there could be more, like, this is the northeast quadrant, right? So it could have more than one building on it. So it's just the case that what has emerged is that should we progress with the development of that corner, that it should have the Seniors Activity Center, and then some density, whether that's housing, but there could be more than one building in that quadrant, which would also then, if it's the commercial office piece, maybe what would realize that through a partnership of some sort. The other southeast corner has been sort of designated for upcoming regional health facility and office space in that section. So, you know, that's where it's the case of, you know, I think, should we progress with an expression of interest is getting feedback from staff, and then sectioning it all off, or are we just looking at going with that one? And then, of course, the southwest quadrant, we have northwest is library, northwest, southwest would be a public plaza, health facility, and then an activity center with housing. So that sort of falls in line with the modeling that Key Corp did earlier this year. I think it's because of the lay of the land and the potential of shadowing on the buildings. So that's how that's situated. But we have, you know, we would need staff to report back to us, because we have also, they're also doing some serviceability works on it, and we would also need to allocate funds into the budget as well. But at least this could roll it, and then it's the case of, okay, I mean, ideally, given that we know the library is moving along, it may make sense to progress the public plaza at the same time as the northeast quadrant. And then when we know more of what the southeast, but that's kind of a staff, I need some more technical expertise to guide us on what would make the most sense. But it may be timely to, because we know that there's a need for community gathering space and all that, that those are the sections that are progressed together, particularly because we know the library's rolling along. If everyone can somehow work together and make the best fit of labor on that land at one time, and maybe, it's just me thinking a bit out loud. Councillor Logans?
Yeah, there's definitely no need to say no to any of it. We can have ground level commercial. We can also have ground level offices because of the way of the lay of the land. You can have ground level when you come down into the lot and ground level off of Wadham's Way. And then on top of that, that's 2 stories. You can have 4 more stories of housing. So there's definitely no reason to say no to all the things that we need to have in our community.
I do think, though, that should we progress in that way, that because this would be a district-led project, not managed, like, so that's not the option, but I guess what I would like to see in that is that there would be like climate adaptation. So like what is, you know, like we're not putting in incandescent lighting. I mean, I don't think you can even do that, but in terms of energy efficiency, to be built in that way with proper green landscaping, proper rainwater management. We're sort of set a leader in terms of what this looks like, and that the whole thing be fully accessible. Like we know that Minister Simpson is moving in that direction in the built environment. So in this case, rather, like if it's housing, these 4 units only are accessible. It should be all of them, because you could have a child that might break his leg playing hockey, and you'll be very grateful to be in a fully accessible space. And everyone can use these units, so it just means that people aren't having to wait for a particular unit to open. They should just all be that way. It's like our washroom. It's a fully accessible washroom. It's funny that we have one outside the building and not one inside the building, but that's, again, like moving in that direction. That should be what we're doing, and just show that leadership in terms of, because at any one time, 25% of our population, whether it's in Sooke or in the province, is living with a disability in some sort. So we should just put that in, and then I think it's inclusive for everybody, and we've sort of set that example. And also with the energy efficiency piece, whatever we can capture there, I think it'll also help with grant eligibility going forward that we're doing that. Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, one of the great things about this Lot A report was the milestones that was set up, a series of 7 milestones. The first was that council support the report and endorse it. Second was to undertake, and the district is in the process of starting this process. Well, we've done the arborist report for the existing trees. Thank you to the late Councillor Parkinson on that. The civil engineer review of the entire property, rainwater management plan, as you say, is engineered, is milestone 2. Milestone 3 is the rezoning of the site, and that's where, when we say things like commercial, got to be, you know, there'll be quite a lively evening, that, given past history on the attempt to rezone Lot A in 2017. That went back and forth a fair bit. Now, the report does have a series of zoning considerations and recommendations, and even a new bylaw recommendation to split the property in 2. The west side will remain P2, institutional uses, and the east side, I'm sure the Director of Planning could tell us, what was that?
The east side would remain, or would be rezoned to, recommended to be rezoned to CTC, so town center zoning, with some minor tweaks like text amendments specific to the site. That would be one option.
And that wasn't going to include retail.
Well, through the charrette process, there was some discussion around small retail components, which mean like a small coffee shop, like a support type of commercial for the other uses on the site, so that was included, yeah. Often people think retail is selling of clothing, but it's just, coffee shop is retail, the same.
And I'll just close by saying, you know, here we go through these milestones. After the rezoning, the site surveying and preparation, subdivision of lot if required is number 5. Number 6, start phase development with the library and public plaza. And milestone 7, interestingly, was where this task force kind of came in. We were to be nimble and respond to certain situations. And we are in this golden age of housing at the moment. You know, after many years of stagnancy and no action whatsoever at federal and BC Liberal levels, we're now in this moment when one must act quickly to take advantage. So there's a new funding window under the Housing First and the BC Housing Social Housing program that opens in the spring. So hence we as a council opted not to reconvene the Community Center Advisory Committee and instead form this more nimble task force to come up with these business cases. So.
Thank you, Councillor Bateman. Just if I may, with the milestones, like we have moved the order a bit, but I think that's okay, because I think that if we send this out to an expression of interest and we see what comes back, then when we go through a rezoning process, then we can clearly articulate to the neighbors, we are rezoning this because this is what we want to see. And I think some of the challenge before was that you rezone it and then sell it off, and then we don't know what it would be because it has a town center zone on it. So in this case, we're guiding this. Like, I don't feel the need, like right now, to say, okay, let's direct staff to rezone this. Rather, let's direct staff to come back and report on what we send out to expression of interest. Let's see what comes back to us, and then we progress the rezoning. Does that make sense to staff?
Actually, that makes perfect sense. And then, so an expression of an interest is just garnering interest. So then
Yep.
we would include any reference to potential rezoning in future in that. But then after going back and forth with council, if the decision was to move forward with rezoning and that was successful, then an RFP would follow, where then you're committed to commit to someone, to a developer, to.
And then at this
If that was the
timing, then
case.
staff could estimate, should we follow through with that, this is roughly what the budget allocation you need to put in for 2020 would look like, whether it's subdivision and rezoning fees or RFP, all of that, and then we can properly plan for that in the budget cycle for next year, because right now, we don't have anything allocated, and we're pretty much out of council contingency for that. We could probably run an ad, but not much beyond that. But given the timing, we could start with that expression of interest. So I'm just sensing, though, and what I'm hearing, and we'll go to the public, I don't want to make a resolution just yet, though, is that council does want to see density on this. Okay, so, anyway. Anything, did you have your hand up, Councillor St. Pierre? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
This is just something that came up since we all did the Lot A charrette together. And, we should have been aware of it, but didn't quite make it into the proceedings at the time. And that's that the district is growing, not just in terms of the overall population, in terms of staff to actually serve that population. We have more police officers, more firefighters, and more district staff. And our present facilities were quickly outgrowing. We don't actually we're not land rich as a district. We don't have a lot of options necessarily. I don't know if any of the business cases actually included one where the district would act as a partner in order to have, for example, new council chambers and, try and sort out some of our growth pains in terms of staffing and where to put them. Would that have been under option B, or, is there an option, like option D obviously could include almost anything, but I'm curious about that piece.
But also, like, this was specific to the northeast quadrant and what the community wanted, so that still leaves the southeast quadrant.
I'm just curious as to whether or not this is something that we want to include in an request for proposal, an RFP, that sort of thing. The other thing was really just also, again, emphasizing, in some ways, our really desperate need for that retail space in the downtown, in our town center, and also as a means of balancing our tax base so that the tax burden doesn't fall unduly on residential taxpayers. And I understand and believe in the need for affordable housing. You have to know I do. But at the same time, I have this real tension between, we don't have very much land, this is in a really prime location. Is this really the best place for affordable housing? And if that was the only way to make the project move forward, I would totally go for it. But at the same time, if we can actually provide the local economic development driver of having more commercial retail space while helping our tax base, while doing all these other things, I would potentially prefer that option, and I just want to put that forward.
I agree with you in that way, to have the density, because there is a need for more commercial space. So I think that's the question to ask, is to see, like, that way, if there's a partnership, that could be what a partner may look to do, is that they would manage that and then obviously build out and attract rent to, and that is how this is doable. So I think that's the part that we could look to get back. Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, I think one of the keys here, and what I recall of that 2017 pushback to the rezoning of Lot A from landowners south of the Sooke Road in those R1 properties, I think they are, is that our town center plan of 2009 indicated that Brownsea Boulevard would be lined with mixed-use residential retail. And, of course, land values will be higher if there's an opportunity to zone, I assume, with commercial properties along there. So we do have that master plan. And when it gets revved up again, provided people aren't just banking the land they're buying, right? That's ideally where we'll be seeing more retail space. But yeah, the other thing that came up loosely was, the idea of swapping out the land, swapping and giving density bonusing to a developer and swapping it out for a piece of land that is more scenically spectacular, or, yeah, because this piece of land currently is hidden behind Evergreen Mall. Evergreen Mall will evolve in time, right? And so I think it'll be very attractive in time, and it's in the heart of a growing residential community, next door to the library, of course. So we didn't come up with a business case for a swap, but that's always something council could consider.
Councillor Logans?
Thanks for bringing that up, because I had forgotten about that. I do feel, though, that the land is in the town center, so I think we're fine to do commercial there. The Brownsea land is not in our near future. This land is, right? It's in our strategic plan. We're working on it. We're getting it done. So I'd prefer that we work on that land and make it as much of a project as we can. But in terms, to the community, in terms of rezoning this land, I hope that everyone understands that council has a very, very much clearer vision on what we want to do there, and that we're not the first community to do this. There are other people who have done this. There are other communities who have done this. So it's not as scary as it seems. I hope that is reminded throughout the process.
Terrifies me, but that's just because we're at the beginning of it all. Anyway, so it is, right. But it's, anyway, I'll turn it over to members of the public that are here today to speak on this. One or any of the business cases, ideas, suggestions?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. Yeah, I will. Thanks, Your Worship and Council, for giving us this opportunity to speak to the task force. I'm Mary Dunn. I am the chair of the Souq Region Communities Health Network, and this is Rick Robinson. He is the vice chair, but also the co-chair of the Souq and Juan de Fuca Health Foundation. So we've been working in collaboration with the Souq Seniors Drop-In Center for a while. We quite clearly support Plan B as it's presented, and I think that's been brought clear. And it was really great to have the housing information here, because it supports so much of what we discussed in the task force and that what we had discussed before. The housing survey, continually stresses the need for seniors being the fastest growing population, and also the need for affordable housing. We know that a lot of seniors in Souq do live in their own houses now, but we know that as they age, that becomes more difficult for them. And having an opportunity to have a place that you can move into where you can still age in place without having to go into a home or an assisted living allows people to stay in their home that much longer. And as mentioned, it then frees up other housing. we heard about the population of Sooke. You know, senior population is 32% now. It's going to be 36% by 2026, and that means that there will be over 6,000 seniors in our population. Option B is looking at having a ground floor with the senior center, senior center, possibly youth component, depending on what it is that they feel that they would like to see in that center, and potentially other spaces on the main floor, and then 4 floors of housing above it. So it would be 75 units, all of which would be accessible. So they would all be built as accessible units right from the start to allow that opportunity to age in place. We started looking at this actually before the task force was, because after the charrette, it was mentioned that the Seniors Drop-In Society, quite clearly, there would be a senior center put on that quadrant. So we did start looking at what would be the affordability of that and started to develop a plan, which was then put on hold. So there is already a working committee geared to looking at how this could look. That committee was put on hold when the task force was struck, and is ready to reconvene to look at this more. So we have a vision of independent living for seniors within a supportive community with social supports on the main floor and accessible housing, as I said, to allow people to age in place. We feel that this project is really a perfect fit for the Sooke core because it allows for walkability to pretty much any need they have. The doctor's offices are right there, the bank's right there, the pharmacy, there's room for shopping, you know, it just would make it so convenient. So the bus surface right outside the door, because we understood that the transit would be changing and Bottoms Way would become a hub for the bus service. So we know that this will also decrease the cars on the road by allowing this walkability, and it will also, like I said, decrease our costs on the health system later on by allowing people to be aging in place. The Souq Seniors Drop-In Society has been using all its skills, capacity, and connections to obtain a permanent workable space for the needs of the Souq seniors for the last 10 years. It's been 10 years since we had a Souq Seniors Drop-In Center in Souq, and we're probably one of the only communities that doesn't have one. So in the last few years, they have collaborated with Searchin to look at how we can continue meeting those needs of the seniors, decreasing the isolation that we're seeing in seniors without having these social connections. And of course, it's not all seniors, but there is a large portion of seniors that do get that. If we look at page 76 of the report, it says the greatest non-market housing need appears to be in seniors housing, assisted living, and below market rental. Souq will gain by working with the nonprofit sector, provincial and federal agencies to create and implement programs and policies that address the adequate number of affordable renting houses available to support these increase moving forward. So we feel that Plan B has really brought that forward, and Rick's going to talk a little bit more about that process.
Thanks, Mary. We've had, as Councillor Bateman is aware, we've had initial feasibility discussions with a nonprofit developer and also BC Housing. And as Jeff said earlier in his comments, this probably is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to access funding from BC Housing. BC Housing would not only subsidize the housing portion, but also contribute to the operational cost and contribute to a portion of the cost to build the senior center. This application to BC Housing must be as shovel-ready as possible and submitted in the spring of 2020. So there is a sense of urgency around Council moving forward on this agenda item. The housing component is key in making this project affordable. The building could be accommodated within half an acre. That northeast quadrant is approximately a little over 1 acre. This building, what we're talking about in terms of the building footprint, would only occupy half of that space. So options in terms of Councillor St. Pierre's thoughts around office space, potential more accommodation for the district itself could be accommodated on that northeast quadrant, or as Mayor Tate said, southeast quadrant as well. As seen in the business case for option B, the investment, $254,000, and use of the land owned by the District of Sooke leverages the development of a $22 million project that will include a senior center with the potential of a youth component and 75 accessible, affordable residences. The Sooke Seniors Drop-In Center is also contributing $90,000 in cash and assets. The assets consist of commercial appliances for the kitchen that is part of the senior center that we have envisioned, and is partnering with the Souq and Wandifuka Health Foundation to raise the balance of the funds for the senior center. The District of Sooke, of course, as in the case of most other municipalities in British Columbia, has the ability to provide additional capital funds as well. In our survey of senior centers in other municipalities, most, if not all of them, are actually subsidized by taxpayers from the local municipality tax base.
So I think in addition to the option B's business case outlined above in the homeless needs document, there's a couple aspects that we wanted to highlight. One is that having this type of a structure will help prevent social isolation and loneliness amongst seniors by having the support of the seniors programs, Senior Centre and all their programs down below. Wadham's Way becoming the transportation hub will enable travel to and from, especially for those seniors who choose not to drive anymore. So it helps with the green space as well. Reduction of cars on the road supports the needs for Souq to decrease its carbon footprint. And we know that one of the major carbon footprints is cars, especially with how many cars we tend to have on the road out here, out of necessity. It provides easy walking space, as mentioned above, to the essential services such as doctors' banks, food bank stores, pharmacy, cafes, post office. It provides an opportunity for youth engagement and consultation with the youth's representatives about what they would like to see in there in terms of supervised programs. And with the rest of Lot A being available, there's compatibility to the other proposed amenities such as the health centers, the farmers market, the library, the open space, and allows that additional space that can be utilized for other needs or be kept in reserve for increased housing later on. So we feel that option B, obviously, we feel supports a lot of what we've heard today, but also supports the needs that were shown in Charette. And with the work that's already started, the Seniors Drop-In Society in collaboration with Search and Sooke and Wandifuka Health Foundation are really ready to help progress this, to continue it. So thank you. And any questions from council?
Councillor Logans?
How much funding are you expecting us to ask for from the taxpayers for option B?
That's certainly up to council in terms of what council would be contributing. It's an optional ask. The cost for the senior center component, senior center youth component, is estimated at $2 million based on 5,000 square feet. And so we would be mortgaging $1.1 million is what it shakes out to be. So if there was money from the District of Sooke that could help augment that, it reduces the demand on the Sooke Seniors Drop-In Center for ongoing mortgage payments.
Thanks.
Councillor St. Pierre?
Really appreciate all the amazing information because you actually cover a whole lot of stuff. And obviously we've done a lot of work on this. Really appreciated the footprint in terms of what it would actually take on Lot A or the Northeast Quadrant in order to actually accommodate the structure. I'm curious as to the site planning that you might have done. I'm not really sure. Would you be looking at frontage on Wadham's or where would, so that's one question. Actually, I'll let you answer that question, then I have a few more, if you don't mind.
So I believe Andrew has looked at that, and I think the frontage would be on Wadham's Way, is that correct? Yeah.
That makes sense? Just wanting to clarify.
And then there would potentially, because of the slope of the land, be some component of whether it become underground parking or another subfloor because of the slope of the land as well.
Good. The youth component was mentioned a few times as, sort of tentative. And I know that for myself, I would want ideally to have a youth component, maybe even to have, there's money on the table potentially for daycare facilities. And I'm wondering if that's actually part of some of the work you've done in terms of fleshing out what that might look like.
We haven't actually fleshed that out yet because we were waiting for some things to happen. MCS was hiring a new youth coordinator, and so with the idea that they would be taking on a leadership role in looking at the needs of youth. Unfortunately, that person was hired in the summer and then left right away, and now there's a new person in. So we were kind of waiting for that because we would want to work in collaboration with them, not do something that is already being done by another agency. And then we understood that there might be a youth committee being struck by the district of Sooke as well, and we weren't quite sure where that is. We have looked at all the previous reports. There's been a number of studies done on this in the past. They are all a bit dated now. Those reports all actually said that from the youth, they didn't want space. So that's why we're saying, you know, we still would need to consult with today's youth to see what is it that they would be looking at and what they're wanting. We're not planning anything without their input, obviously.
I think my understanding was that the youth didn't want to share space. They actually wanted space, but not to share it. No? Oh, I'll pass that
So
on.
there is a lot of confusion over that, which is why we'd want to, you know, have some consultation with the youth to determine what exactly it is that they'd be looking for. I think Councillor Logan, sorry, did you have some information on that?
Yes, and the studies have gone on over multiple years, and they
Yeah.
all say the same things repeatedly, just like the senior studies say the same thing year after year after year. And that is that the youth do want space for unstructured play. However, that doesn't mean unsupervised, but it means unstructured. And that can be a big challenge depending on who's managing the space. And they are the group most willing to share out of any of the groups who have ever been studied in our community. They don't want specific things here, here, and here. They just want a space to be. And that is what is repeated throughout all of the reports.
Yeah, I think daycare with the grants, it has to be a bit more involved, like there has to be providers in hand, and this is where daycare would access the space the same time as seniors. So I don't know that, unless you're going to provide evening or shift work, you know, but with the grants that are available through the province, is more we have a provider in hand and are moving to build a daycare because we have providers that, and it's the space that needs to be created. In this case, we know we have daycares, but there's a shortage of EC, of early childhood educators and staffing. So I don't know that would be the model that we wanted to progress unless we went to an EOI and they came back and had that answered for us. Go ahead.
Just quickly, I know that in terms of just health of a community in general, multi-generational is really a lovely thing to have. I'm curious, I mean, it seems like we're looking at, 4 stories of housing for seniors. We're looking at issues of mobility and so on and so forth, but it also looks very much like mostly seniors not necessarily having access to young families or having kids around, which is known to, I think, to be good. I was wondering if your plans took that, or some of your thoughts took that into account or not.
We did look at that for sure, and in talking to seniors, we definitely see a whole variety. We know some seniors really want to be in those multifamily buildings, and others don't. Others, the noise and everything bothers them more, and they want a quieter place. So I think there needs to be a variety of options available for people. Our understanding, or my understanding, was the new CRD housing that is being put in was going to be for families. And I know that came up earlier, and we weren't kind of sure. The staff person has left now. But I thought that was going to be for families. So, yeah, it would have to be looked at. We're only looking at 75 units here, so we're certainly not looking at what the full need is. Did you have a comment, Rick?
Yeah. I think what we're envisioning for the building, particularly in this location, Councillor St. Pierre, is how marvelous it is for seniors that with age often give up their ability to drive, and a large proportion do have mobility issues as they age. So this location in town center with, as Mary pointed out, with walkability to all of these services, plus the social support of the seniors center/youth center, but mostly the senior center, obviously for programming on the ground floor, caters to the needs of the seniors in that building. And there really isn't anything like that in Sooke other than institutionalization, such as Air Manor. No one else has those kinds of supports that we're talking about. And it goes a long way to keeping individuals in their home. Research shows us that those kinds of social supports, as is the case with co-housing, enables individuals to stay in their own dwelling for up to 10 years longer and forestall the need for institutionalization.
I'll just add that what I heard our staff members say is that because the provider of that's going to run the housing at the CRD project hasn't yet been determined, that's where they're uncertain who the target audience would be. But if it's similar to other CRD housing projects, it would be based on BC housing qualifications and criteria. So then it would be a mix of families and seniors and singles and so forth. 3-bedroom obviously is geared to families more so because there is a shortage of that in the built environment. In this case, so like I'm in support of this plan. It's just recognizing that should we actualize it, there will be noise in this site. So when you have people that are maybe used to living on quieter, larger parcels, this, like Wadham's Way is where our emergency vehicles, our fire trucks are gonna go up and down that, transit will go up and down, delivery vehicles, Church Road is busy, and I hear that from folks that live in Knox. They're surprised at how busy Church Road is. At the moment, that's the only access point for anyone dropping off at school. School buses, everything. More transit buses will flow down. And of course, if we have a public plaza, I imagine a basketball and maybe some music and Christmas carols. There will be noise, so it's not going to be quiet living. And if it's a wood frame construction, which is great, because that's what the province is progressing, there is a significant noise transfer. So it's not going to be, it'll be noise through living, and I think that may deter or it may attract, depending. Right, and there would be an eye in the sky monitoring everything that's happening on the building, but that's just the natural, and there's nothing we can do about that. So I'm just preparing myself for phone calls that are going to come later. This is the town center, there will be noise, and that's because of where it is, so.
And if you choose to move in here, you know where you're moving.
Yeah, like it's not going to be a quiet place.
I think of my own mother, Mayor Tate, who was in a seniors development in the town of Comox. And if you know Comox, you know about the shopping center in Comox. Basically, it's a strip mall with some indoor commercial space as well. My mother's condo that she purchased was right across the parking lot from this shopping center. So she observed the goings-on in the parking lot, just as you said, and it was a source of activity and interest for her, despite the numerous car alarms that were set off by seniors not knowing which button to push to unlock their cars. And she found it quite enjoyable, as did many other people in her building. So I really don't think the noise is a major thing. It's really important for seniors to be engaged into the community, and part of that engagement is putting up with the usual noise that you would see on a busy road. I think the amenities that this location plus the building itself would provide far outweighs any consideration about a bit of noise from kids playing basketball in that on the property, or a daycare perhaps, whatever actually happens in terms of the development on the site. I don't see that as a major impediment at all.
And it's part, people would know that where they're living. Councillor Lajeunesse.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think sequestering seniors away in a corner of the community is not a good idea, because they do need to be involved and see what's going on, and I think that location is perfect given the amenities that are existing there and what could be added in the future. I think it's a perfect location for seniors.
I agree. The location is perfect. The need is clearly there. I have a few concerns. One, which I'm just going to throw on the table, youth need to be taken out of this conversation. We've had ample opportunity to meet with them, to discuss with them, to consult with them, and they have not been involved. So please, let's just not pretend we're involving them. My next concern, slightly the taxes, but I think that's doable. Like 1.1 million isn't too crazy, but it's something we would have to put out to the taxpayer, of course. But my biggest concern is the spring 2020, was that when it was, for the BC housing funding. And if I may, through you to CAO McInnes, because it looks like it would have to be shovel-ready for spring 2020, where I don't feel like we're in the right spot to be shovel-ready at that point due to the feasibility studies, the servicing of the land, and anything else that might come up.
Through your worship, I did have a discussion with Malcolm McNaughton, who is the Director of Regional Development for Vancouver Island, BC Housing, on Friday last week, and he is prepared to come and do a presentation to Council on the requirements for the 2020 call for projects.
Thank you.
If I may, Andrew was just saying that in terms of doing the grant proposal, and correct me if I misheard you wrong, Andrew, that we would just have to show that we're available. So there's deadlines on putting in the proposals and such, and then we'd have to show that ability that we are prepared to start. So,
Sorry,
for
to
being
start
shovel
in
ready.
spring? To be shovel-ready in
I'll let
spring?
Andrew-
No. So we had the BC housing director here to talk about what they were looking for and the timelines. So they were saying that the opening is likely to be in March, April, and that we have between then and September, October to get the proposal in. And then they will be looking at the most likely shovel-ready projects. So you have to show by that point that you have done, really outlined what Jeff was talking about. That if they couldn't see anywhere in the future that this is going to happen, then it would go to another priority group.
Right,
But,
that makes perfect sense. Okay,
yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anything else from Ms. Dunn or Mr. Robinson? Okay, still in public input, so I'd like to go to other speakers. Thank you very much. Other members of the public today? This is on item 3.2.
Thank you. Nikki Logans again. I would like to encourage that council involve youth in the Northeast Quadrant. With all due respect to Councillor Logans, I think that this project has regularly given the impression that youth are on the sidelines. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to really, really involve youth in our community rather than have them sitting on the sidelines. I think that when you do go to an RFP or an expression of interest or whatever that process looks like, that it be put out clearly to proponents who may be interested that the youth need to be included in this community project. If not in the Northeast Quadrant, certainly there needs to be a change in the perception that to include, purposefully include youth in these conversations for Lot A. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Loggins.
And sorry, just to clarify, my comments were not specific to Lot A. We have included them in the process. Our staff did a great job of working with youth, but it's related specifically to a seniors youth drop-in that I was speaking of.
Thank you.
Ellen Lords. I agree with Nikki. The youth need to be involved in this, and I'm not necessarily on this Northeast Quadrant. I don't know where we're going to come up with 1.5 million. We don't have any money to build, and I think there should be an E section where we sell off that property. I was on the Community Spaces Committee, and never did we come up with a plan to build a senior center or anything like that. That came up to council after it just came to council. We didn't have it in any of our minutes. As Councillor Bateman, if you look back, we didn't have any discussion on that. Nikki Loggins and I were meeting with the seniors all along to find out where and how they could be, and with the youth. And that was looking for a senior center, that wasn't looking for housing. And we did meet with Air Manor. Air Manor was more than willing to put up a senior center in conjunction. The property is there. They're looking for funding. They're looking for an opportunity as well. So there could be housing included in that, as well as the senior center. The infrastructure's there. The plan is there. I don't see why we're looking at a place without any infrastructure. And putting in underground housing, I believe it's something like underground parking, I believe it's something like $275,000 per space. It's really ridiculous to try to put in underground parking. So that, I don't even think that's part of the discussion, because it's swamp there and you're dealing with water. It's going to be more expensive. I also would like to know the number of non-seniors looking for homes, and that'd be a question from the housing committee, because how many non-seniors are there? Of course, I'm a senior too, but how many non-seniors are looking for housing? Are we we got to measure this, and as Mayor said about the CRD housing, you're not sure if that's going to be for seniors or if it's going to be for multifamily dwellings, and I think we need to be a little careful before we start spending money on special interest groups. I mean, we're all in this together, and I think we have to make sure we respect everybody. What was another question? And this project, you're looking at $22 million, and grants, yes, you can apply for grants, but it's still all taxpayer money. And I don't know that it's going to be there. We don't know what kind of monies are going to be there. So you can apply for a grant, doesn't mean you're going to get it. So we have to be pretty careful about making decisions based on grants as well. What else? Can't read my writing. It's okay. Well, it's always been like that. Oh, and also the $90,000 for the seniors that they would put forward. That a lot of monies were given in grants to the seniors as well for some of their assets over the years. So that's still taxpayers' monies. So I'm not anti-senior, I'm a senior myself, but I also think we have to be respectful of everyone in these regards. And do we sell this and look at a different opportunity? I have some thoughts on that as well. There's different opportunities that I think we should be looking at to support both seniors and youth. And youth components can be anything from acting to soccer. I mean, there's all kinds of components with the youth that can be working in with the seniors activity center. It doesn't have to be really active stuff, but more passive uses, and they're looking. I mean, Amber Academy is looking. The Souq Harbor players. I mean, there's all these people that are looking. So we have to really make sure that we have everybody involved in this aspect, and shouldn't push ahead too quickly just because there's a grant available. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ors. Sorry, Ms. Hall, can you turn on the microphone?
There. It's been a long time. I've got a different angle on this, and it worries me quite a bit, and that is the land itself. How much sort of checking has been done on that property? Because first of all, you've got a a riparian area, because there's a creek that runs right down the middle of that property. And on either side, you must give up, what is it, 30 meters on either side of that creek. You have to give that up as a riparian area. And there's other material out there. I didn't have time to look at it all. Somebody phoned me and dumped all this on me, and I'm sort of trying to figure out. That part I know because I went up the other day and looked. The creek's not running, but there is a creek there. It may be running now because ours started 2 nights ago. So this one, there is a creek. There's no question, and there's no question about the 30 meters on either side. So you are giving that up. We've also got the downstream. If you start developing up on that property, I'm told that because the water runs from that property all the way down to, well, you know where the big pond is when you come down Souq River Road, Souq Highway. There's that big ugly pond behind the museum. That's where this water goes. And because that water goes there, you're going to be responsible for riparian area all the way from there up to the hill, because that's a fish-bearing stream down at the water level, down at the harbor. And in that pond, it's a fish-bearing stream and partway up. So you have to bring that in. So it doesn't sound to me like there's been enough study of the actual land and the fact that it is a watershed. It's a bona fide watershed in all the documents. So this is not just an ordinary piece of land that you go dig a hole and because it's got water everywhere. So these are things that I don't think have been properly looked at. I think you need to go back and start over. There was a study done by, I'm not sure who, because I got the phone call and I have no idea. But I do have the material. And there's a lot more to this than simply, let's build this here and this here and this here. And you can start with the creek that runs down the middle, because that creek goes all the way down to the pond behind the museum. And you will have responsibility for it and its riparian area the whole way. So there's things here that need to be looked at before we start jumping around building buildings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Just further to that, like when Wadham's Way was being constructed, I remember that there was a study there about the water, because there was maybe some type of frog that was identified, and there was some habitat work that had to be done sort of near Anna Marie Road, from what I recall.
Yeah.
And then I've never seen that work from that project ever happen, but I remember it came up. I don't remember who the consulting, so McElhaney, I think, was the consulting group that did some of the due diligence, because that's where Wadham's is now. So that may be where those findings are to start that. But there was some particular habitat work. It's sort of an outstanding question that was supposed to be done when Wadham's went through and the connection to Anna Marie was made.
You were here when John Stephen was here as our fisherman, our fisher person. He would always tell us about that, the water up on this particular piece that you're worrying about, and then it goes down into that, it's 3 or 4 rows. And he said, and then, I'd like to skip this, but I have to tell you, it goes uphill, which it does. It comes up out of that 3 or 4 that there, goes up the hill, over to the right as it goes past those houses, and then there's a great ditch there. There's a really big, by the ballpark, because we used to lose the ball down in there all the time. And then it narrows down and comes out behind the museum.
Right.
But it is the same stream, and because it's the same stream, you're going to be responsible for it with this property.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hall. Just, Ms. Campbell, and then I'll go to Councillor Bateman.
Just to provide council some peace of mind, so part of the due diligence for Lot A includes a report from a qualified environmental professional, so they will be looking at all of that.
Thank you. Councillor Bateman?
Yeah, so as the head of planning states, are you head of planning or director of planning? Director, okay. In flux. Okay. Yeah, so the milestones on coming out of the Lot A report do follow a very logical progression, and I think that there's a lot of best practices at play here in the development of this property. In answer to Mrs. Lewers, in terms of the Open Space Committee, which the Community Center Advisory Committee, of which I was a part as well, the final recommendations the committee's final report came up with all kinds of wonderful ideas, including a full and proper renovation of the community hall, a community Quonset hut out at the Kaltassin Works Yard, which could be utilized for workshops, rehearsal space, art activities. A separate youth drop-in center was suggested, as seniors facility as well. And the final ideas relate to what they call the new lands, which is now Lot A. And as stated in the business cases, there are some very clear directions that staff explore the feasibility of mixed housing development in conjunction with community center uses. So this has always been a bit of a thing, a community center. Sea Park is a recreation center, a senior youth activity center, which has been the catchphrase for all these business cases for this piece of land, is effectively a community center of a sort, if not defined exactly as that. And of course, we had their plebiscite in 2014, which very clearly stated the people of Sooke were prepared they wanted this to happen, overwhelmingly, 85% in favor. So the funding, back to that piece, $2 million in total for what I will continue to insist is a senior youth activity center. It would involve the $254,000 out of our reserve fund, as much as $600,000 from BC Housing for the shared amenity space for the people living above, and that can be incorporated into the seniors plan. And that leaves $1.1 million for public-private sector fundraising. So the district wouldn't, chip in $1.1 million, given that we've already contributed $500,000 of land value plus another $254,000 for the reserve fund. The new health foundation, and Carol and her team will be, and Al Jones and some of these other major figures in town here can there's a lot of wealth, as the housing needs assessment shows, there's a lot of money in our community as well. And this is so perhaps there might be a further municipal contribution, but it's not certainly wouldn't be 1.1 million to bring us up to that 2 million number. The parking, the underground parking, I think the Lot A report definitely said no to that because it's just out of the question, cost-wise, as Mrs. Lewis states. So at grade, there would be an option. And what was the other? Oh, the youth piece. It's difficult to get young people involved. I know there's this West Shore Youth Engagement Coordinator, Caitlin Kennedy, and there was talk by the task force that how do we get her involved, and that she's got quite a broad mandate at the moment. They're now job sharing that position, so there's possibility to get her involved. We do have some background from Councillor Logan's did a couple of wonderful reports. Well, Getting It Built is one, which has some youth contributions. your document about young people wanting to make their lifetime homes here, perhaps after going out and seeing the world. There's that. The Souq Region Community Youth Connections back in May 2008 has some useful data. There was a Souq Youth Forum back then. So there is material here, and yes, absolutely, the task force realized that we need to engage young people again to find out their current needs and how that can complement and be housed ideally along with the senior facilities. You know, I see a hardwood, you know, I'm a yogi, and our yoga center closed in town, and they don't know where to, the teachers have trouble finding a space. Well, we need in that space, ideally, a hardwood floor room that can be rented out and used for any number of activities. So, yeah, I think it's all very good. You know, the Lot A report had some good recommendations moving forward, and one of them was the creation of a Lot A task force, not a task force, a working group. We also discussed reconvening the Community Center Advisory Committee and refreshing their terms of reference. So I don't know what the next step is, but this. Yeah, I guess the next step is to receive this for information, and so I so move that we. Okay.
Let me just go to Councillor Logans, and then I have a comment, and then I'll take your motion, okay? Go ahead, Councillor Logans.
Yes, sorry, just before there's any motion, there's a really real discussion I need to have with all of you and the public about youth and using the term and how you use it. I really love that you reference those reports. They are dated. We do need to do more work. But when we are applying for grants, we need to reference them as our source of information. And also, we need to read them. As it was clear today, that hasn't quite been done to the extent it potentially should be. When we're going around the community using the term youth and using it in our grant applications without doing any proper engagement or consultation at the least with youth, which is not difficult, it doesn't involve going to one person in the community and relying on that one person to provide all of the information. Our staff are perfect examples of how to do it. They made a few phone calls and set up meetings with youth. They invited youth to our roundtables, and they came. And it's not difficult to get them come at all. You were there, Councillor Bateman. They were there, and they were really engaged. They were more engaged than half the people in the room. But the biggest issue is that when we decorate youth, and let me read you the definition because this is what we're doing here. Decoration is what happens when young people are used to bolster a cause in a relatively indirect way, although adults do not pretend that the cause is inspired by young people. This is adultism. And that directly affects our protected rights of ageism in this country. So I'm sorry to bring that up. It is inadvertent. It's not on purpose. But we have to realize that this is not okay.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other thoughts from members of council? So, Councillor St. Pierre? No? Okay. Excuse me. So in terms of next steps, it is the case to receive this report, and then we could also then ask staff, direct our staff to come back with a report on what an expression of interest and next steps would look like. So like we know there's a qualified engineer report that would be needed for this. What can we allocate for youth resources and engagement, and to actually put some time and energy into that so that it's captured, so that when we go. Yes?
I believe that our staff and the district has the resources in place and ideas on how to do it. And I think it's specifically when community groups are using the term youth, they need to know how and why they're doing it.
Right, so that's where like our staff will come back to that. Like what this is committee of the whole, so we make a recommendation to council. So to come back with those pieces, and then when we look to set up, if we were to set it up then to go to expression of interest, what do we need to, what part or all? Is it a section, is it part, is it all? Lot A that we're looking to do. I think all may be a little too ambitious. I think it would be more likely, I don't know, like I would like some more technical expertise to come back. I'm just sort of thinking with the library, the plaza, and then the other quadrant, and to leave the southeast section alone for now until we know more, unless there's otherwise. Because in terms of the medical facility planning work, that planning work needs to start. So in terms of, it's too difficult to say, okay, build this health building when we don't know exactly what that looks like. That is a purpose-built building. So that's where I would sort of lead that quadrant out for now. And if we add it in, it's only going to further delay the other work and missing grant. So that's where I think it would be more the northeast section. And then to get that staff guidance, because we have had youth fully participate in all days of the Lot A charrette. So to come back, and I kind of hear the same, it's space. Sometimes it's outdoor space. I hear basketball a lot. Like not basketball structured play, but a place where you can actually just shoot some hoops. And in the town center would be great because of that tends to be where young people go. And I imagine many are going to be at maybe employed at Tim Hortons after school, the library for other activities, and many work in that area already. It's sort of it's a safe gathering place because of the transit that exists there. But that's where I would like staff to know, because for me, it's kind of like just go to the high school, I guess, would be what I would do, which may not be the most practical thing to do. So how does council feel about that sort of a recommendation? So parties to receive, and then part B is to recommend direct staff to bring forward a staff report outlining the process of issuing an expression of interest for development of the northeast quadrant of Lot A and associated considerations. And the plaza, I'll just put it in and plaza in brackets, because well, if it's not feasible, they would tell us. So it would be the case of, okay, I sort of see a staff report that would say, okay, to progress Lot A based on the feedback from these things, here's what you would need to do. If you're serious about moving on with the public plaza port, this is what that would look like. To me, that's outdoor space. We need a place for, night market, Saturday night market, other sort of pop-up events. And then it may be a way to address the rainwater. I'm not sure, but that's where, just sort of leave that. And staff might say that is a future report that will need to come at a later date to be continued. But at least it's sort of in that motion. Does that make sense?
Through your worship, because we're talking about an expression of interest, does it make sense to leave out a quadrant? This isn't an RFP. I mean, it would be valuable to get feedback on what possibilities there are in developing that third quadrant, not just for health services, but any other uses that might be needed, like office space.
Okay.
Because it has space to do multiple things. If we leave that out, it might make it less attractive. And this is just expression of interest. So keeping it more open in general to the remainder of all of Lot A allows us then to come back to council with, here's the proposals we heard, and here's why they think this would work over this.
Okay.
And then make a determination to go for RFP. But I would say we shouldn't come to council with a report until after all the due diligence is done.
That's right, because we know that all of that is still being collected. So in this case, then I would just say for the development of the remainder of Lot A. No? Mr. McInnes?
Thank you, Your Worship. So here is the rub, in my opinion, and it goes back to some of the comments that Councillor St. Pierre made. The option B is predicated on the fact that we'll be looking for a not-profit housing society to in fact be the developer. We may leave some options on the table if that is the wish of council. So to open it up to more than just non-profit housing societies may give council a wider range of options. And the other thing that I think is really germane and important to the discussion today, and it was certainly mentioned more than once, is we do not have a healthy reserve fund for this type of thing, and we have very little borrowing power. So I think the private part of this and the funding part of this is going to be really important for the success of this project going forward, notwithstanding the fact that the call for BC housing projects is imminent, and we do need to get on with the work. So
sorry, Mr. McInnes, would you recommend then that we progress, like go with the whole thing and then see what comes back to us, and not sections.
I would suggest that that's probably the best option.
Okay. I'm comfortable with that. And I will share with council, like back in 2014, when we did have that question on the ballot, it did, the initial ask for the referendum question did have a borrowing dollar amount on it, and then it got rejected from the province at that time because the project was not clear. It's like, well, what are you borrowing? It was just, oh, we need to borrow X amount of dollars. So when we sent that forward for approval, at that time, there was an intent to actually progress community spaces, and that was before even Lot A was acquired. So then it came back, well, you can't move in this way. So then it became the question that was on the ballot, do you want us to continue on with this work? Which we had received a resoundingly, yes, you need to do that. So I'm comfortable with us moving in this direction. We've done, and just to see then what comes back. But we do have the due diligence, and then I've just, in here, I don't know that it needs to be in here or not, is that with the due diligence piece, that budgetary items will likely emerge then that could be flagged for the 2020 budget. That would be part of that then. Okay.
So if I could, just a bit further clarification on process. So we do have a budget allocated for due diligence. Planning has got the requisite quotes and do have a recommendation into myself. It looks like it's going to be within the purchasing policy under my authority to award that contract. But as far as the budget process goes, what I'm envisioning and what we will be talking about on November 4th when we meet for our service level review, there's going to be 3 drivers to change in the 2020 budget. There will be the service level reviews, basically operational things. We will be asking council, to the best of our knowledge, we'll tell you what the baseline resource allocation and the service levels that we've established with that baseline will be. We'll be asking council, with these service levels, do you want us to increase service level, decrease service level, stop doing something that we're doing now, perhaps start or consider doing something. So that will be one driver for changes in the 2020 budget. The second driver will be council's strategic plan. And the Lot A is high. It's 3.1 in the strategic plan. So how we continue to move this hub in the town center forward. There will be budget requirements, and we'll be doing our best to bring them forward and giving council some idea of the magnitude of the resource allocation that we think is going to be necessary to be successful in moving this forward.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. McInnes. So in terms of this resolution, we have that the Committee of the Whole received the Northeast Quadrant Lot A Task Force report for information, and that Committee of the Whole recommend that Council direct staff to bring forward a report outlining the process of issuing an expression of interest for development of the remainder of Lot A and associated considerations after the due diligence components have been completed. Councillor Bateman?
So the report outlining the remainder of Lot A, does that also include the Northeast Quadrant?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
So it's all 3 quadrants.
Right. Well, all but the library land, yeah. Given the tight timelines leading up to this BC Housing window of opportunity opening from March to September, do we also need to add another piece here to keep it front and center, or?
With that, I think, can't
What's
think
the
for
timeline
staff,
on
but in
this?
terms of the feedback, I think staff is hearing that we wish to progress with that. So with that, would we jeopardize the grant if we did this like this? Or no?
So we still have to like we've just begun collecting all the quotes for the due diligence. We still have to get that work done. Then there's coming back to council with the expression of interest. There's a whole rezoning process that would be required, and I suspect you would want that to be completed with a grant application to show that you're more shovel ready. So I'm not sure that it would be possible to meet that deadline of next spring, given the zoning process, unless you wanted to submit without all of those things in place. That would be council's.
Councillor Logans?
Yeah, this won't hinder the process. It will happen at the same time as that, right? We'll be receiving expressions of interest as the timeline approaches, as staff are working to get the due diligence done for the lot. So I don't think in that way it limits us at all on option B, but what it does is give us additional options at the same time. The problem is, just as staff mentioned, is the timing with actually getting the due diligence done and getting the funding for it.
But I mean, we're stuck with that anyway. Even if there isn't a grant, we still have to do the due diligence. Like there's no, we have to go through that, we have to do that work anyway before, regardless of a grant or no grant, it still has to be done. That's just a definite piece. Mr. McInnes?
I believe they couldn't do what Councillor Loggins suggested. I think we could, the expressions of interest could be based on the charrette modeling. But the due diligence, as Mrs. Hall suggested, may suggest differently.
Yeah, so
but
that's.
I think we can continue on this road and have the two things going simultaneously, with the understanding that there may be some ramifications from the due diligence and the civil engineering that comes back to us.
Right, so that's where we would need to adjust accordingly depending on those findings. But the work will all happen. Right. Councillor Logans?
Yeah, and just to follow up, I believe the charrette information does include like keeping that stream there.
It
And
does.
Maybe not to, if it is in fact riparian area, maybe not to that extent, but it definitely did, like there, I think all of the diagrams that were worked on and everything included it as like a nice natural feature. And then that was the reason we had the southwest quadrant as a park, was so that we could accommodate that watershed area too if we needed to.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So is somebody prepared to move this motion? Moved by Councillor Logans, so it's moved. There's no seconder, so anything on the motion? Nope. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously then. Okay, so then that'll refer to our next council meeting, and then, because we're in committee of the whole, so we have to recommend to next council, which will be on Monday, the 28th.
And just further, so Mr. McNaughton and I have been talking about him potentially coming to the November 18th meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a gentleman from BC Housing. Okay, so when we adopted the agenda, there is an item 3.3, that a new business item that is also in your iPad that I just want to turn our attention to. Very exciting. This is our strategic plan quarterly update. So members of the public may find this interesting. And I'll turn this to Mr. McInnes.
Thank you, Your Worship, and my apologies. I was a little late getting this report in, so that's why it was late getting onto the agenda. But I'm very happy to give Council your first quarterly update on your 2019-2022 Council Strategic Plan that was adopted by Council on September 28th. So the plan was developed with an accompanying Appendix A, which is the action plan. And the purpose of the action plan is to track progress on the 3 goals and the 18 objectives that are in your strategic plan. The action plan will also be the background for our annual report, which is a requirement under Section 98 of the Community Charter. So as the plan was being developed, and when I started my tenure here on July 2nd, I met with Council on July 15th, and we went through the 18 objectives that are in the strategic plan, and we identified the first 6 objectives to be working on. We do have another, my 3-month evaluation meeting scheduled for later in November, and we'll go through the remainder of the objectives and highlight the next set. So will be the structure of the report is to structure the 18 objectives into now, next, and later. So that gives staff some idea of how to allocate our resources when it comes to working on the strategic directions that council has provided us. So today, I wanted to talk a little more about process than content. You see the objectives and you see the status report. And I'm hoping to get some feedback from council on whether this will suffice, whether this form of reporting, and once it's approved by the committee today, we will put it on the agenda, on our website, so it will be a public document that the public can follow as well. Follow up with the quarterly reports, and as I said, it will parlay into our annual report, which is a requirement under legislation. So happy to talk about either the process or the content, but I'll leave that for any questions that you might have.
No, thank you, Mr. McInnes. I think this is great, and then we can then, as council has new ideas or new initiatives, we would see if they fit accordingly with any of these items, and then if so, we would need to look, if they don't jive and it's something new, then it's the case of where does that fit in the priority section, does it belong or not, and what would the timeline be? And then we would constantly be updating this with the idea of completing them all.
Correct, so that's
Yeah.
my vision as well. So every year through the budget cycle, we would reconfirm the priorities. And as I say in my report, the nature of our business is that challenges and opportunities do present themselves occasionally. And what administration's responsibility will be is if something is referred to administration from council, if it has significant impact on resource allocation, our responsibility in our staff report will be to explain to council how we see that affecting the priorities that have been set.
Okay. Questions, Councillor St. Pierre?
Something came up for me when we were looking at some of the other items, for example, Lot A. And that was that 3.1 was Lot A, and therefore theoretically, does that mean it's in a higher priority queue than 3.6, for example? Because when we put together the strategic plan, I hadn't been aware that that might be the case, so I'm just curious about that piece first.
That is my interpretation, yes.
Important new data to take in. I'll have to look at where food security is sitting on climate action, that's for sure. And that brings me to my second question, which is really, will there be an opportunity at the budget to potentially re-queue things depending on how council and staff feel about things?
Yeah, so each year, and this budget cycle is a little clunky, but you will see on November 4th, the service level piece, which really should be much earlier in the season and should kick off the new budget cycle. So that service level piece will be the first piece of information and feedback we get from council on changes that you want to see in the next budget cycle. We'll take that away, we'll cost it out, and we'll bring it back to you and say, based on the service level review, here is the financial impact as we see it on the things that you would like us to consider in the next budget cycle. The second driver would be the council strategic plan, and we will have a discussion on an annual basis through the budget cycle around, are these objectives still in the order that council wishes us to pursue them?
Perfect, thank you.
And some things might happen all at the same time, right? Because of the phases of the work or the grant or whatever. So in some cases, we just had to put them in an order. But it could be that three things are happening at once. It's not waiting for one to complete. It's just there's many things happening at the same time. Councillor Logans, then Bateman.
Just really quickly, thank you so much for this. It's very helpful. I love how it's laid out for us and that it will be online. I also love that the public, I'm assuming the public will get exactly this. I love that they'll be able to see the partners and funding. It's nice to see who's involved in the processes and where the money's coming from. Thank you very much.
That's great. Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, like Councillor Logans, I really like this document. It's such an easy scan. We can see where we're at. It's wonderful to see that this 5-year financial plan will be presented to us on December 5th. So congratulations to because that's a big step forward, to Ms. Gray. It is Ms. Gray, yeah, Rachel.
We left the happy face in there.
I just noted under status, there were a few other things that you might want to add before you post it, which is on page 6 of the document, that in fact, the Parks and Trails Master Plan and Transportation Master Plans are both well underway, and I think, when are we expected to see?
They're both in their initial draft, and so
Right.
there's still some back and forth to go.
Yeah.
It may not be until the new year that you get something in front of council. Yeah.
And through you to staff, I was curious about the OCP, and so has that request for proposals gone out?
No, it has not.
No. Okay, all right, good. Yeah.
Anything else from members of council? Okay, so then the recommendation is that Committee of the Whole, Ms. Michelle, I'm sorry, members of the public, if you would like to speak on our item here. Sorry to have forgotten. Thank you. So I didn't make a tick mark. Okay, so the recommendation is that the Committee of the Whole receive the 2019 Q3 Council Strategic Plan update for information. Moved by Councillor St. Pierre. Any discussion? No? All those in favor then? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. That's our new item. So then a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Lajeunesse. All those in favor? Remember to vote. Opposed? Carried unanimously.